Part 39. A Sledgehammer Breaks into Pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 381. Newgate and Orgrim were on their own boats, staring at each other from more than 100 meters apart. Since the confrontation just now, no one of them has spoken, and the atmosphere has been a little heavy for a while. The subordinates around them were all staring at each other without saying a word. The sea and ferocious sky, which had become turbulent because of the fight between the two sides, gradually began to return to calm. Just when the clouds in the sky stopped surging, the corners of Newgate's mouth curled up slightly. Orgrim also had an evil smile on his face. "Fire!" Orgrim and Newgate shouted at the same time. The moment they finished speaking, the muzzles of the Moby Dick and the deep-sea overlord Black Narwhal roared at the same time. The Moby Dick is quite big, but not much different from ordinary warships. The Black Narwhal is really big and has an innate advantage in firepower. However, once the cannon fired, the scene was evenly matched. It's because Whitebeard came with an entire fleet, and Orgrim's fleet is currently fighting the Big Mom pirates. The only thing standing in the way is the Black Narwhal. Turn the wheel, hurry up. Turn our ship sideways and blow up that bastard in Newgate. Orgrim swung his sledgehammer to create a shockwave, blowing up several flying shells in the air, while urging Vincent behind him, who was controlling the rudder of the ship. It's coming, but seriously, Captain, we are one ship, and there are dozens of ships on the opposite side. Do you want to do this?" Vincent asked, cursing while turning the helm quickly. "What are you afraid of? This ship is built by your eldest brother. It is the most powerful warship in the world. As long as the ship is turned sideways and more than 100 cannons are fired together, the firepower is no worse than theirs." Orgrim laughed loudly. Rengar's expression was also a little excited, and he said, "One ship, fighting dozens of warships alone. This scene reminds me of the Battle of Adver. But at first we were besieging Roger with dozens of ships, but now the situation is reversed. Besieged by dozens of ships. Gee, ha 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 ha." Orgrim laughed first, and then asked loudly, "Rengar, tell them, in the waters of Adver, which one wins, the one with more battleships, or the one with fewer battleships? Although it is very regrettable, I have to say that Roger, that damn bastard, took advantage of the storm and the navy to win." Rengar also laughed loudly and said, "It seems that we will win today too." Orgrim flipped the warhammer in his hand, raised his hand, and directly hit a cannonball back to its original path like a baseball. After the rudder in Vincent's hand was fully loaded, the huge ship of the Black Narwhal, the body also gradually turned sideways. The gunners in the cabin quickly set up the guns and opened the muzzle deck. Hundreds of the most exquisite and world-class artillery were poked out of the cabin like the spikes of hedgehogs. "It's a pity that that bastard Lowly from the Sphinx is fighting in the front, and my royal gunner is not here," Orgrim said with some regret. At the same time, the Moby Dick had turned its hull sideways, exposing the cannon muzzles on the side. Then, several more ships lined up in a row and aimed their cannons at it. Black Narwhal. In fact, in naval battles, although the number of battleships is very important, in fact, quality and firepower are more important. Why? Because of space problems. In naval battles, the range and space of warship exchanges are limited. Looking at the dozens of ships of the Whitebeard pirates, they seem to be too aggressive and untouchable. But in each wave, only 3 to 5 ships can be in direct contact with the Black Narwhal. If anything happens, all battleships, thousands of cannons fired at the same time. Orgrim would probably laugh out loud, because this formation looks very domineering, but in fact, there is a 90% chance that one of his own people will hit him. Man. At the Battle of Adwal, Shiji also surrounded Roger's Oro Jackson with dozens of ships. But why could Roger persist until the storm came? Did he persist until the Warring States period and other navies came? It's the same thing, that's right. Different from ordinary pirate warships, the Black Narwhal is a rare ironclad ship with strong defense, which is different from wooden warships. The artillery on the Moby Dick blasted the hull, leaving at most a crater. There are no traces of it, and it cannot break through into the cabin, and looking at the strength and heat, it is impossible to break through the defense in a short period of time. On the other hand, the Black Narwhal, every round, is roaring with hundreds of artillery rounds, and one wave passes by, as long as the cotters of the Whitebeard pirates make a mistake, it will definitely cause sparks and explosions. In just over 10 minutes of exchange of firepower, the two Whitebeard pirates' battleships next to the Moby Dick had already begun to sink. However, there was no particularly big loss. It was just a ship. As the captain of the top pirate group, Newgate had many ships under his command. As for the manpower, as long as he was not killed by cannonballs, with the support of brother warships, few people will drown in the sea due to the sinking of the warship. The various cotters of the Warhammer pirates have also entered a state of war at this time. Rengar is in the cabin on the second floor. He kept wandering around, shouting loudly. "Change the gun! Change the gun! Move quickly, as soon as the barrel is red hot, change the gun quickly. The special Whitebeard pirates can't break through our defenses. There's been an explosion within us, and Lord Hammer is going to kill people." Rengar roared angrily. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw a cannon turning red. He went up and grabbed it on the red barrel. He wrapped his arms with domineering force and used his strength to help. The giant cannon was unloaded. Then, 4 boys carried a new cannon and placed it on the gun stand. The ammunition hand did not stop at all, and filled the barrel with a dark cannonball in 3 strokes. Then, the huge cannon roared again. Back and forth, up to 30 seconds. It is conceivable that these Warhammer Pirates crew members who are able to hang out on the Black Narwhal are all the best among the pirate boys. Lord Rengar, if we continue fighting like this, we won't be able to hold on for long. The number of reserve artillery pieces can be rotated up to 5 times. After 5 times, there will be at least a 30-minute gap to wait for the first round of artillery to completely cool down. We cannot bear those 30 minutes of unilaterally withstanding firepower. A strong pirate man ran over and spoke hurriedly. Rengar frowned slightly, but still ordered, "We can't control so much now. We can't stop until the cannons are red. We need to show off our momentum. Don't talk about why Orgrim didn't configure more firepower when he configured it. Because the current configuration on the Black Narwhal is already the optimal configuration. It can fire 5 rounds without interruption. Note that it is not cannonballs. Instead of 5 rounds, the cannon is burned red for 5 rounds. The concepts here are completely different. It is estimated that the only one in the world that can achieve this kind of firepower configuration is the Black Narwhal. There will be 3 in the future. There is nothing we can do about the 10-minute gap. Due to storage problems, if you install an extra round of artillery, it can actually be installed, but it will reduce the equipment of other supplies and even affect the longest range of the ship. Secondly, the load capacity is also some exceed the standard, which will affect the speed and flexibility of the ship. Finally, in the original estimate, the opportunity to encounter such a situation where all 5 rounds of artillery are red is too rare. I never thought that such a situation would happen. One ship can withstand the situation of dozens of ships. After all, this is somewhat ironic. And even if this situation does occur, usually the 30-minute gap, according to the original idea, can mostly be used to adjust the hull, reselect the windward point, or even pursue or guerrilla. Therefore, theoretically speaking, it is reasonable to have a 30-minute gap. It's just that this time we happen to encounter a super special situation. On the other side, on the Moby Dick, Newgate raised his hand and punched out. The space was shaken, and the flying shells were directly shattered in the air. His eyes were fixed on the Black Narwhal, and he felt a little emotional for the other party in his heart. Fierce firepower, it's simply outrageous, simply cruel. This is so much better than the most powerful warship in the Navy. Newgate has been at sea for so long, and this is the first time he has seen such a ferocious warship. The firepower is so strong. In fact, Newgate has the strength and the opportunity to directly destroy the Black Narwhal. After all, with his ability, which is said to be able to destroy the world, how can he not be able to defeat a ship? But he didn't do that. In fact, this is almost the consensus of the masters on the sea, or the unspoken rules. Because Newgate can destroy Orgrim's Black Narwhal, can't Orgrim not destroy Newgate's Moby Dick? If we really play like this, all these fleets will sink into the sea in a matter of minutes. So what kind of artillery do you use? Let's return to the embrace of Mother Ocean together and reincarnate. Therefore, whether it is Whitebeard, Shiji and Roger back then, or other masters, after their strength reaches a certain level, few people will do this. Of course, this is in a close match. If you're dealing with the little Yakuza, it depends on your mood. When you're in a good mood, let him and you shoot each other for fun. If you're in a bad mood, just sink his boat to the bottom of the sea and no one will say anything wrong. Dad. The situation is not good. Marco flew through the air, directly caught a few cannonballs with his body, and landed next to Newgate with Qing Yan. This ship is so powerful. Our firepower cannot break through their armored defenses in a short period of time, and I estimate that this is only the first layer, and there may be several more layers later. Against a ship, the fleet cannot fully exert its firepower at saturation, and can only add additional layers. Oil tactics: board one ship one by one, and sink one ship one by one. This has already sunk 3 ships, Marco said quickly. On Orgrim's side, there is some problem with the continuous output of firepower, and it seems that the situation is not good. But on Newgate's side, if it cannot withstand such brutal firepower, the situation is also not good. After all, they also don't know how long Orgrim's ship can fight like this. What if it is a saturated artillery loading mode? Seeing as their shells are free of charge, and the cannon does not stop, it is not impossible. Because Orgrim is the largest arms dealer in the Dark World. Can he lose himself? So Newgate is unsure. But at this time, the artillery roars, and the pressure on both sides has not reached the red line in his heart, so Orgrim, neither Tom nor Newgate are willing to take the lead in stopping the bombardment. Because this means they have a guilty conscience. Then fight? I don't believe it. One of his ships can beat dozens of our ships? Newgate roared with anger in his eyes. This area of the sea was like setting off firecrackers. The roar of artillery fire was continuous, and black smoke soon enveloped the entire battlefield. It was pungent. The smell of gunpowder permeated the war hammer, and it was even a bit irritating to the eyes. On the watchtower, Hank suddenly shouted, "Master Hammer, the Moby Dick has turned the rudder. They seem to be taking the lead." Gee, ha 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 ha, that old guy can't hold it anymore, but that's right, the Moby Dick is so damn powerful, an ordinary ship would have been blown up 5 or 6 times at this point. Orgrim laughed loudly. Then he remembered the worries that Rengar said just now, and his eyes flashed. They have changed their tactics, which means that the naval battle has entered the second stage. Pass the order, and the cotters can take action. As soon as Rem finished speaking, a slash flew from the Moby Dick. It seemed that Newgate and he were in perfect agreement. This is also one of the unspoken rules of naval warfare. If both sides' artillery can't do anything to the other side, then the level of war can be raised. My hawk obviously couldn't bear the loneliness anymore. Looking at the flying slash, he said with a smile, "It's the foil sword Bista." The moment he finished speaking, the black sword in his hand Deoye also flew out with a slash, directly cutting Nabista slash into 2 pieces through the air. Then, my hawk stepped on the fence, staring at Newgate opposite, then charged up the black knife in his hand, "Yeah," and shouted in a low voice, "Black knife, Flash. The slash broke through the sea surface, and quickly cut through several flying cannonballs. After that, it slashed at Newgate with undiminished strength. "How big is the gap between the world's strongest man and me?" my hawk whispered softly. But unfortunately, just when the slash was about to hit Newgate, Jose took a step forward from behind Newgate, his body instantly turned into diamond, and he blocked my hawk's slash. He just relied on his physical body and ability to receive a full blow from my hawk, the best swordsman in the world. That's right, with a full blow, my hawk slashed at Whitebeard's knife. How could he hold back? A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 382. The melee in the waters of Butter Island is about to come to an end. Many warriors from the 1st Legion of Avalon have already boarded the port and coastline. Then, they fought against the Big Mom pirates' defensive line again. Lean in, hurry up," the Sphinx was standing on the deck of her car, urging impatiently. Not far from her feet, a guy covered in blood, with extremely charred clothes, was unconscious there, looking miserable. Then the guy's hands were leaning on the sea tower stone shackles, and he was obviously not one of his own. If you look closely at the face that was blackened by gun smoke and gunfire, you can see that this guy is still a not-so-big person. Charlotte Deifuku, one of the 3 brothers of Katakuri. He was also the guy who just fought with the Sphinx in the sea. But now it is obvious that this guy was pushed to the ground by the Sphinx and violently hammered, and the hammer was directly lost. He even had the ability to fight back, and was even captured alive. On the other hand, Sphinx, this rampaging Lolita was just like cheating. There were almost no injuries on her body, except for the corner of her mouth on the left side of her face, which had some bruises and redness, as if she had been injured. It was like a punch, with a little tear and some blood. Nothing else. Even her punk-style lowly dress was not affected. She was still cute, but a little crazy. An evil temperament. It seems that Sphinx's character has also affected her immediate subordinates. In short, when her ship was moored at the port, she was very rough and directly collapsed some of the piers. Sphinx Si didn't care about these small things. Before the ship was stable, she had jumped directly from the deck. The port had been breached at this time. There were broken limbs and corpses everywhere on the ground, including the 1st Legion of Avalon, the warriors, and the pirates of the Big Mom pirates. Tisk, it's so tragic, Sphinx smacked her lips. But there was no unbearable look in her eyes, because she knew very well that this was war. And Sphinx, who had been following Shiji since she was a child, had also experienced this kind of thing. Violent scenes of bloody chaos have long been accustomed to it. Taking a few steps forward quickly, Sphinx grabbed a strong fishman who had just retreated from the front line with a broken arm. The strong man was after Sphinx caught him. His expression was a little surprised. Before Sphinx could speak, he said, "Sir Sphinx, I am not escaping. According to the regulations of the 1st Legion of Avalon, the seriously injured know I need to retreat under appropriate circumstances and wait for medical rescue. I broke a hand." As he spoke, he wanted to lift his severed arm. It was not that it was amputated. The arm was still intact, but the bones inside had been broken, and the broken bones had pierced the muscles and the skin of the arm. Can see. Sphinx didn't mean to blame him at all, and said, "You are the heroic warrior of our Avalon 1st Legion. Of course I am not here to arrest you. I just want to ask you, who will be the first?" "Climb first." The strong man from the Fishmen tribe was stunned for a moment, and then said uncertainly, "I didn't see it with my own eyes, but people on the front line are spreading rumors that it seems that it's Aaron from our Fishmen tribe, the captain of the 3rd Company, that's the one. Responsible for guarding Avalon Station." "Is it really Aaron?" Sphinx said with some surprise. Then she quickly asked, "Where is Aaron?" "Where is he?" "On the front lines. The strong fish human man shook his head with a sad expression and said, I don't know, no one saw him. Maybe they didn't care about him for the time being. There is no trace of him on the front line. Maybe it's because of him. Maybe dead. The Sphinx's expression dimmed a little. This newly recruited younger brother, and Aaron was very capable in getting the honor of being the first warrior. As a result, but died on the island. What a pity. At this moment, the medical soldiers on the ship also rushed down. After seeing the strong fishman with a broken hand, he immediately greeted Quick. Can you go? If you can, come with me on the ship. If your arm can be connected, it's fast and there's no problem. The longer the delay, the greater the consequences. Okay, okay, the strong man from the Fishmen clan said quickly. As the first batch of people to rush to Butter Island, although they did not get the title of first warrior, they must have made great achievements. As long as they don't die this time and don't retire due to injuries, in the future, there is a great chance of getting promoted and making a fortune, and it is not impossible to even join the Warhammer pirates. But after saying that, the fishman strong man looked at the Sphinx with a somewhat gloomy expression. He reacted the same way and said quickly, why are you still standing there? Go to treatment. When your injury heals, I will still want to drink with you. By the way, what's your name? The strong fishman man said with a smile on his lips, I am reporting to you, the 7th Company of the 1st Avalon Legion, the 1st Combat Battalion, and the deputy captain of the company, Demir. Ha ha ha, Demir, I remember, don't die. Sphinx laughed and patted him on the shoulder. Soon, this strong fishman man followed the medical soldiers and quickly retreated, boarded the Sphinx's ship, and went to receive treatment. And Sphinx expression darkened again, and he cursed, it's all that damn Defu. If it weren't for him, I should be able to keep up with Aaron, then he wouldn't be dead. Thinking of this, Sphinx wanted to go back to the ship and kill that idiot Defu. Sister, your gun. A boy ran down from the boat, carrying a Gatling gun, and called to the Sphinx. Hearing this, the Sphinx turned around and took away the heavy Gatling gun. Come, grab it in your hand and say, that's all, this is war. Aaron, although you have only been my little brother for a moment, as the eldest sister, I will go and avenge you now and destroy these big moms, the head of a member of the thieves. The Sphinx grabbed the Gatling gun and ran out of the port, but after just a few steps, his feet stopped. He couldn't help but turn his head and look at a broken stone pier not far away. The place was completely covered by ruins, and there were still a few corpses lying around. These are not the main point. The main point is that the Sphinx seems to have found something familiar. A jagged blue nose stood upright from the gap under the ruins. Ordinary people might not notice this kind of thing, and even if they did, they wouldn't care about it. But Sphinx's haki is very strong. After entering the battlefield, she has been using her haki. And she was also very concerned about that nose, because she had only seen such a unique nose not long ago. Aaron, the Sphinx said with a hint of joy in her eyes. Then, she quickly ran over and opened the ruins a few times. She happened to see Aaron's figure slumped on the stone pier. There was a blur on his chest. A ball of viscous white liquid appeared. Sphinx recognized this thing at a glance, frowned and said, Katakuri? Did you bastard, hit my little brother? When we went to Avalon for the first time with Master Hammer, Sphinx and Master Hammer defeated Katakuri and robbed the riri fruit that he was also eyeing. Therefore, Sphinx's fight against Katakuri Kuli was not a stranger, so he recognized this thing immediately. Isn't this the bastard's glutonisto? He stretched out his hand and probed Aaron's nose again. Although it was very weak, it was still a little bit. It looked like these Nyochuan, while aggravating Aaron's injury, also just blocked his wound, preventing him from dying of excessive blood loss in a coma. Nightingale, the Sphinx called out instinctively. But after being stunned for a moment, she realized it again. Nightingale ran away with Master Hammer. She didn't know where she was, but it wasn't on her ship anyway. Ship's doctor. Quick, call the ship's doctor. This boy is the first warrior of our Avalon First Legion, my little brother covered by the Sphinx. We can't let him die, hurry up, save him, SPHYNX shouted to some of the younger brothers behind him. Soon, a strong man carrying a medical kit ran over. There was a ferocious scar on his face, so he didn't look like a life-saving person. Ship doctor. Are you really good at medical skills? Don't be a butcher, right? The Sphinx said very doubtfully. Sister, I really know how to do it, the strong man said helplessly. Sphinx didn't bother with him and said quickly, okay, save him quickly. If he dies, I'll shoot you in the head. I'll shoot you in the head, this is the Sphinx's catchphrase. She often said this, but in fact, apart from attacking enemies, the Sphinx did not really kill anyone in Avalon. She is still very measured. In addition to her boss, because Orgrim always teased her that the Sphinx was not smart and was cute, so the angry Sphinx often shot Orgrim, and even hit it in the head. But just like the Sphinx mocking Defu, Mr. Chui is a real man. Whenever this happens, he will not hide or hide. He will withstand the Sphinx's bullet and he can quickly catch this bastard lowly and put her my butt is swollen. So every time, in the end, it was the Sphinx who felt aggrieved, burst into tears, cursed, rubbed her butt and retreated in defeat. In short, the butcher ship doctor didn't care about the threat of the Sphinx. He quickly squatted in front of Aaron, took out various tools in the medical box, and gave him a rough inspection. His breathing was very weak, his injuries were extremely serious, he had lost a lot of blood, and his condition was very bad. If it had been 5 minutes later, he would have died, the ship's doctor said quickly. What? Save him quickly, the Sphinx quickly ordered. The ship's doctor tore the military uniform off Aaron's chest, then touched his neck and pulled out a pendant military badge. He stepped forward and looked at it along, Giant Teeth Shark Murloc, captain of the 3rd Company of the 1st Legion of Avalon, 1st Combat Battalion, my blood type is F. Fortunately, it's not a special blood type. The warriors of the 1st Legion of Avalon, without exception, were all issued military badges, which they hung around their necks on weekdays. It was a symbol of status and a very honorable thing in Avalon. Members of the 1st Legion of Avalon, with their military cards, can enjoy a 20% discount on purchases at various establishments owned by the Avalon Warhammer pirates. This is nothing. The most important thing is that this thing may be able to save lives at a critical moment. For example, Aaron doesn't have much time now. If we get a device to check his blood type or something, he will be cold when the results come out. But having a military card is different. All kinds of key information are clearly written on the military card. On the battlefield, medical soldiers can quickly make correct judgments based on the situation. Sister, I need blood type F. There must be some on board, the ship's doctor spoke quickly. But Sphinx had already pulled open his wrist cuffs and said, we don't have so much time, don't let this bastard die, I have type F blood, hurry up, give me a blood transfusion. Sister, the ship's doctor looked at the Sphinx hesitantly. After all, Sphinx will definitely continue to go to the front line later. Originally she was not injured, but now if the blood is drawn, especially giving a blood transfusion to a Murloc like Aaron who has lost too much blood will definitely make the Sphinx weaker. In case something happens to the Sphinx in the next war, then Mr. Hammer can't blow his head off? After all, everyone in the Warhammer Pirates knows how much Sphinx is favored by Orgrim. Do you think who dares to shoot Mr. Chui in the head and still live so happily? This is the evidence. What are you looking at? This is an order, hurry up, after rescuing this bastard boy, I still want to blow Katakuri's head off, the Sphinx cursed. Seeing the Sphinx's determined expression, the ship's doctor thought okay. At this moment, he seemed to understand why Master Chui likes Sphinx so much. Because, she may have all kinds of problems, but at critical moments, she is definitely a reliable and trustworthy person. The Sphinx can do this to ordinary members like them. Then do you need to think too much about Master Zui and the others? Big guys, give me your monthly ticket for flowers, throw it at me, I'm thick-skinned and can bear it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 383. In the dense forest of Butter Island. In this area, electric lights flickered, and cookie crumbs were flying around from time to time. Enelu swung his battle axe and split open a biscuit soldier with one blow. He paused slightly and his face looked slightly pale, as if he was a little weak. There was an opening on his chest, but it wasn't deep, but the blood was still flowing. Not far away, Cracker's figure appeared again. He clapped his hands gently and created two biscuit soldiers to guard him. Compared to an arrow, Cracker is in much better shape. Although his body was extremely charred, his face did not seem to be weak, and there were no obvious injuries on his body. Perhaps because he hates pain, he fought very obscenely and suffered almost no injuries. Ha 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 ha, I told you that you were unlucky when you met me, Enel. I have to admit that your thunder fruit ability is indeed powerful, and you yourself are quite good, but you are still too young, Cracker said with an evil smile on his lips. Enel took a breath and stared at Klija. Don't make a conclusion so early, until the end, who dares to say who will win? Still want to struggle? Although my speed is not as fast as yours, it is not very slow either. I can completely dodge your attacks. And my army of biscuits is unlimited and will tire you out sooner or later. Maybe it would be better to surrender now, Keelgia smiled and persuaded him to surrender. Anelu's eyes did not change, but he felt very uncomfortable in his heart. He had obviously made up his mind not to let Lord Hammer and the others down again, but the reality was always so cruel. Indeed, just like Keelgia as Gia said, he is still too young, and youth always seems to be his weakness, that is, lack of experience, and his practice time is shorter than that of these long-established masters. In terms of strength, naturally there is a gap. Talent. Talent is indeed very important. But if Cracker can become the core cadre of the Big Mom Pirates and become the second among the three generals, will the talent be inferior? Ability. Ability is indeed very important. The Thunder Fruit can be called the strongest, but an arrow has not been developed for a long time, but on the contrary, the ability of Cracker has been developed for many years, and the difference is not that bad. There is no obvious gap for the time being. Therefore, an arrow is playing very well difficult. But asking him to admit defeat is impossible. Although I am not very proficient in this move, but, there is nothing we can do, Enelu whispered softly. After he finished speaking, dazzling electric light began to flash on his body. Then, the electric light did not explode directly to hit the bastard Cracker like before. Instead, it attached to his body surface, and it started to flow like running water. Thor, Enelu shouted first. The shining thunder element quickly penetrated into his body, and then, Anelu's figure suddenly swelled up, feeling like a little giant. There was a surprised look in Kalikia's eyes. With a wave of his hand, the two biscuit soldiers rushed in. But Enelu also moved very quickly. He raised his hand and struck out two lightning strikes, knocking the two biscuit soldiers away. Before Cracker could take action again, Enelu changed again. He did not take advantage of this opportunity to attack, but instead took a deep breath and said, "Second stage Kiwan Thunder Martial God." As soon as he finished speaking, Enelu, who had originally expanded his body and became chubby, shrunk rapidly and returned to his original laughter. Looking again at this moment, his pale blonde short hair wrapped under a turban had already stood up. Not only that, the power of thunder and lightning on the surface of his body seemed to be condensed into a set of armor, making his figure look very domineering and prestigious. Electricity was constantly surging in his body, stimulating his muscles, making his state forcibly raised a little higher. The pupils of both eyes have now turned blue and white, with a lightning symbol in the center. Call. Enelu gently exhaled a puff of white smoke, looked at Cracker and said, winning or losing starts now. What the hell are you talking about? Is this how the natural system is used? Kielgia asked a little strangely. It's really strange. Generally speaking, natural ability users rarely use their abilities on themselves. On the contrary, they mostly use their powers to make them incomparable. The energy is released, destroying the world and destroying the world. This is the normal state of the natural ability users on the sea. Because their destructive ability is so outstanding, it is not easy to change the climate and environment of a place. Because their energy release is very huge, and the scene is also very grand, so in ordinary people's perception, most people think that natural ability users are the strongest among the three systems. But at this time, Enelu he concentrated that huge energy on himself and did not vent it out to attack Cracker or something like that. A smile appeared on the corner of Enelu's lips and he said, if it works like this, you will know if you try it. The moment the voice fell, Enelu moved, and his figure disappeared from the place. Cracker's expression suddenly changed, and he wanted to dodge, but it was too late. Enelu's figure had already appeared beside him, and the tomahawk in his hand chopped off his head. It's getting faster, Click immediately thought of this. He couldn't dodge, but he could block it. The famous sword in his hand, the pretzel, was directly blocked by his side. But he couldn't completely catch the blow. The powerful power of thunder and lightning, along the metal blade, it was directly transmitted into the body of Kaliki. If it weren't for the power of the armed domineering force in his hand, he would have been electrocuted. The next moment, the power in Eniro's hand exploded again, and he struck directly. Cracker was thrown out and broke several big trees before he stopped. Has the strength become stronger? Kielgia was shocked again. But soon, he discovered that Enelu did not pursue him immediately. At that opportunity just now, he should have caught up with the combo, which was the best choice. He might even do it again, injuring himself. But at this time, Enelu seemed to be controlling the huge power of thunder and lightning in his body, suppressing them and not going berserk. He paused for a moment. It was only 3 or 2 breaths, but this also proved that yes, he is not very skilled in mastering this kind of power. This is a flaw, but also an opportunity. Yes, Enelu has indeed not fully mastered this kind of power. Let alone the ability user himself is thunder and lightning, to really it's so simple, so what kind of ability can you develop? Powerful power must be gradually controlled to be stable. The development of the second stage Giwan, thunder, and martial god ability actually has something to do with Orgrim. When Enel was young, he was brought down from Sky Island by Orgrim and trained and taught by his side. At that time, Enel was still a little guy, and Orgrim would tell him stories when he had nothing to do. For example, ninjas from the country of Wano know various escape techniques. Among them, the boss of the ninja village can use the power of thunder escape. There is a move called thunder escape armor, which uses the power of thunder escape to stimulate oneself and enhance defense. At the same time, you can also comprehensively improve your own quality and so on. From that time on, the young Enelu was very interested in the ninjas of Wano. It was not until he grew up that he realized that those stories were all made up by Mr. Hammer. Ninjas don't have these weird powers at all, at least the ninjas of Wano country do. Originally, even if this incident was in the past, Enelu only regarded it as a childhood memory and thought of it from time to time. Until the last time, he was violently hammered by Garp. After the failure, he was rescued and returned to Avalon to continue practicing in seclusion. During this period, Enel began to consider how to develop his own thunder fruit. Then he remembered this story. Ninjas can't master the power of thunder and lightning, but they can. Although Mr. Chui tells this as a story, the ideas in it are indeed very good. Then, the move of second stage Giwan Thunder Martial God was developed by Eniro. It's just that the time is short, and Enelu is temporarily unable to master this power skillfully. After suppressing the energy in his body, Enelu glanced at Cracker again. He knew that he could not last long in this state, so he took a deep breath and prepared for a quick victory. The moment he looked at Cracker, Enelu's figure disappeared again. Cracker's expression changed, and he quickly formed a biscuit shield in his hand, blocking it directly in front of him. The next moment, Enelu held a battle axe and struck it directly. With a click, the shield cracked, but the energy in Cracker's hand continued to flow, and he quickly healed the crack. It's useless, as long as you can't crush me, you can't. After Krika caught this move, he felt certain in his heart and taunted. But before he finished speaking, the biscuit shield in his hand exploded directly. Then, he felt a pain in his chest, a mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, his eyes bulged a little, and his body was under a strong force. Flew out directly. At this time, Enelu's elbow was slightly retracted and he said Thunder Armor Thunderstorm Thunder Dragon. The energy in the body surged again, and Enelu had to give up his plan to pursue victory and suppress his power forcibly. At this moment, the broken biscuit that had fallen to the ground suddenly formed a long knife, and with the power of armed domineering, it stabbed Enelu's chest. Not good, Enelu had a sinister look in his eyes. After all, he is too young and his experience is a flaw. Why is Orgrim so powerful? You deserve a beating. Even if you can survive a beating, you can still continue to wave, and you will always get stronger and stronger. In other words, strong people come out step by step from being beaten. Enelu, now we are in the stage of being beaten. After unlocking this state, with Enelu's speed, with just one thought, he can disappear on the spot and dodge the attack. But if he leaves the state, it will not be so easy to enter again, and Cracker may not give him this opportunity again. Therefore, at this moment, Enelu hesitated a little, but after a moment, he made up his mind to show his own style despite being injured. With a fierce look in his eyes, Enelu did not dodge anything, but still suppressed the energy in his body forcefully. Just when the long knife was about to pierce his body, bang! A roar came. Then, a fist-sized cannonball hit the long knife directly, helping Enelu resolve the crisis. Then, Enelu turned his head and looked into the dense forest. Sure enough, a pretty girl with a slightly pale face walked out of it. The hand cannon in her hand was still emitting a stream of black smoke. Ha 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 ha, no, Enelu is still so weak. If I hadn't happened to pass by here, wouldn't you be doomed? The Sphinx laughed and said. The moment he saw the Sphinx, Enelu breathed a sigh of relief. But before he could speak, the Sphinx changed his expression and asked a very evil and crazy question. Said, let me ask you, have you seen that bastard Katakuri? I'm going to blow his head off. In his words, there was no feeling that he was paying attention to the cricker in the distance. Enelu was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, I saw it, he fought with Yin of the Beast's pirates from here. Gone in the past, now I don't know where I'm going. Ember, the Sphinx was stunned for a moment, and then said unhappily, this is a bit difficult to handle. Stealing the leaders of the Warhammer pirates and snatching Enel's prey, Sphinx didn't hesitate at all and just did it. But if it's the Beast pirates? Although the relationship between the two parties is very good now, in the final analysis, they are still outsiders. Sphinx is not so violent yet. It is somewhat disrespectful to snatch Yin's prey and opponents. Forget it, let's spare that bitch Katakuri's life first. It seems you are in trouble, the Sphinx said while looking at Cracker not far away. Huh? Isn't this guy the one? The Sphinx looked at Cracker and said with some surprise. After thinking about it for a while, he finally figured it out. Yes, Katakuri's dick, is he also a general? Well, they are all generals, they finally have some weight, and they are much more challenging than that idiot Defu. Did you kill Defu? Analu asked in surprise. Ha 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 ha, isn't that natural? That idiot, if Mr. Hammer hadn't told him not to kill anyone, if his brother Owen hadn't come out to help, I would have killed him long ago. Sphinx laughed and spoke. Then she said, it's you, Analu, your ability to choose your opponents is not very good. Last time it was Garp, this time it's General. Do you always like to choose the hard mode as soon as you go to sea? AI Nero said helplessly, we all met by chance, so we can't help but take action, right? On the other side, Krika saw that Sphinx and Enel were talking nonsense, and he was very angry in his heart. You is he Katakuri's second son, and then asked what did you do to Defu Nii? Defu is the third son, and Cracker is the sixth son, so naturally he is a younger brother. Don't worry, he's not dead. I caught him and locked him on the boat, the Sphinx said with an evil smile. Cracker felt a little relieved, it's good that he's not dead. It seems that we are in some trouble, but it doesn't matter. As long as we catch you two, Brother Defu will be out of danger, Cracker said coldly. Ha ha ha, it depends on whether you have this ability, the Sphinx laughed loudly. The moment he finished speaking, the Sphinx raised his hand and shot out towards Cracker. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 384. The turbulent waves were rolling on the blue sea, and the hull of the Black Narwhal was also somewhat damaged at this time. However, the slightly dilapidated ferocious giant beast actually highlights its majestic domineering power. More than 10 ships of Whitebeard's fleet sank directly here. The Moby Dick also had to retreat to the second line. If it continued to carry on, Whitebeard's flagship would be completely over. The cotters on both sides fought fiercely from a distance. Mihawk slashes flew randomly on the sea, and one person dragged Foil Bista and Diamond Jose back. Beckman's poison dyed Marco's figure purple. However, this guy was very stubborn and relied on his own regeneration ability to resist these poisons. From time to time, he would fly over and kick Beckman a few times. The exchange of artillery fire finally eased a little, and both sides began to deliberately adjust their tactics, changing from a fierce attack at the beginning to a roaming style of play. Orgrim was holding the warhammer in his hand and was no longer taking action. Instead, he stood on the deck and looked at the Moby Dick in the distance, which was not ready to continue approaching for the time being. The same goes for the guy from Newgate, standing there quietly, also looking at Orgrim. He took out a cigar from his pocket and bit it on his mouth. Orgrim reached out and touched his body, but he couldn't seem to find his lighter. At this moment, a shell leaked from the hands of the cotters and flew towards Orgrim. Tisk, you can't let me calm down for a while. Orgrim smacked his lips in displeasure, raised his arm slightly, and prepared to swing out the warhammer. But at this moment, a clear voice said flying finger gun. At the same time as the sound fell, there was a whoosh sound, and a stream of air flew past Orgrim's ear and directly hit the cannonball from the air, exploding the cannonball. Orgrim turned his head and saw Queen Stacy walking through the chaotic deck with light steps and walking to Orgrim's side with a smile. As if he noticed Orgrim's embarrassment, Stacy smiled softly and said, "You have been so confused all day, you can even forget your lighter. What will you do if you leave me?" After finishing speaking, Stussy casually took out a lighter from his handbag, walked forward, stood on tiptoes, leaned on Orgrim's chest, raised his hand and lit a fire. Orgrim grinned, but did not refute anything. He raised his head slightly, put the cigar on the flame, and quickly lit the cigarette. Slowly exhaling a puff of smoke, Orgrim laughed and said, "It's simple, as long as I don't leave you, isn't that enough?" A man's mouth is a liar." Stussy snorted arrogantly. On the Moby Dick, Newgate frowned and looked at Orgrim, always feeling a little unhappy. Was I being shown off? Why did he feel invisible? Was he stabbed twice? Why did you come out? It's a mess here. What if you accidentally get injured and leave scars on your flawless skin and your charming beauty? Orgrim raised his eyebrows, moved a little, stood in front of Stussy, and asked. Don't underestimate me, I'm not a flower vase. I am a former senior agent of CP-0 and the current leader of the Warhammer Pirates. I am very powerful. Stussy said dissatisfied. Orgrim smiled evilly and said yes, of course you, Queen Stussy, are very powerful. I, the king of the night, sometimes can't even defeat you at night woolen cloth. Stussy was also an experienced driver. When she heard Orgrim's words, her face turned red and she said rogue. Then, before Orgrim could talk any more nonsense, Stussy's face straightened and she said Butter Island, the battle situation over there has just been reported. Our coalition forces with Kaido have landed on Butter Island. The port has been breached. The situation is almost under our control. Enel and Sphinx have also already arrived. Rushed up. Orgrim raised his brows and said, that means we don't need to continue to stop the old bastard Newgate here, right? That's right. Stussy nodded directly in response. According to the original battle plan, Orgrim would not fight Newgate on the sea. He only had to cover the coalition forces from the side to break into Butter Island. This means that in terms of basic strength, the combination of the Beast Pirates and the Warhammer Pirates has completely suppressed the Big Mom Pirates. Although it sounds a bit embarrassing, after all, it is 2 against 1. But who is called the Beast Pirates? Are the Pirates and the Warhammer Pirates allies? If you, Charlotte Lingling, are not convinced, you can also find an alliance. This is also a bonus point for each other's strength and means. What's more, Newgate's large fleet appearing here and fighting against Orgrim and others, in another sense, represents his joining forces with Charlotte Lingling. Therefore, the current battle situation can be regarded as a sea of beasts. The combined forces of the Thieves and the Warhammer Pirates defeated the alliance of Whitebeard and Big Mom and landed on Butter Island. Mr. Hammer, the artillery can no longer hold on. We need to adjust our tactics, seize the upper hand, and roam around for 30 minutes. Rengar ran out of the cabin at this time and spoke quickly. Orgrim grinned and said no need, Sphinx and Enelu have already invaded Butter Island. The naval battle at the rear is almost over. Next, it's time for the landing battle. On the ship, that bastard in Newgate didn't even have the pleasure of fighting, he didn't care about his hands and feet. If you want to fight, you should go to the island to fight, and take a look at how Kaido and that dead old woman are doing. What about us? Rengar asked excitedly. Gee ha 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 ha, give him some force in the end, hit all the artillery red, and then retreat to Butter Island. Orgrim laughed loudly and said. Yes, Mr. Hammer. Rengar excitedly led the order and went down. Soon, the Black Narwhal, whose firepower had calmed down, became ferocious and violent again. As soon as the firepower here broke out, the Whitebeard fleet instantly I felt it too. Marco blocked a wave of venom from the air that would have hit a certain pirate ship. Then, instead of harassing Beckman like before, he flapped his arms and flapped his wings. He quickly flew towards the Moby Dick. When he landed on the deck, the toxins on Marco's body were gradually being burned away by the blue flames. At the same time, he quickly said, Dad, Orgrim's ship, they are getting manic again. Maybe their adjustment has been completed. Newgate shook his head and said no, there is no adjustment at all. This guy is showing off his power to me. They are going to withdraw. Withdraw? Marco's expression was slightly startled, and then he quickly figured it out and said, over there at Butter Island. It is estimated that the naval battle is over and the Big Mom pirates have retreated. Whitebeard nodded and said. Marco was not surprised at all. After all, he had seen the situation with his own eyes not long ago. Indeed, defeat was only a matter of time. Now, the time has come. What about us? Marco asked. We? Newgate murmured softly, and then said with a twinkle in his eye, of course we accept Orgrim's invitation, go to Butter Island, and have a fight in an upright manner. Soon, while the firepower on the Black Narwhal became ferocious, Whitebeard's large fleet slowed down its offensive and even took the initiative to distance itself. Obviously, Whitebeard did not want to fight at this time, making unnecessary sacrifices. When Orgrim saw this, he did not take the opportunity to step on it. That was too much. The direction of the Black Narwhal was constantly adjusted, and Vincent quickly turned the bow and accelerated, headed towards Butter Island. Then, dozens of ships from the Whitebeard fleet followed, also heading towards Butter Island. Only a dozen warships were left in the sea area where the fierce battle had been. Wreckage, and a thick smoke. After about 10 minutes, 4 Navy warships rushed here quickly. Jun stood on the deck, looking at the sinking pirate ship, and curled his lips slightly, his face looked a little heavy. During the several battles between the Navy and Orgrim, the Black Narwhal never showed its strength. On the contrary, the special technology of being able to fly into the sky and enter the sea made the Black Narwhal, it seems, to have an advantage in escaping. Therefore, the Navy has always believed that the Black Narwhal was the ship Orgrim used to save his life. But today, Jun witnessed this fierce battle on the distant sea. The naval battle completely shattered her impression of the Black Narwhal. It's not that the Black Narwhal cannot be fought, it's just that Orgrim had no intention of fighting in the past. Look at the performance of this ship in a fierce battle with Whitebeard's large fleet. Jun even has reason to believe that even the demon-slaying Order's large fleet, with its 10 naval warships fully equipped, may not necessarily be able to defeat the Black Narwhal in a simple naval battle. This is simply ridiculous, that's outrageous. Sister, there are a total of 12 sunken ships, but it cannot be ruled out that some ships have completely sunk. But judging from the time, there are no more than 15 sunken ships at most, a naval lieutenant commander quickly walked to Jun and said. In such a short period of time, it was able to withstand Newgate's large fleet and sink more than 10 ships of the opponent. The combat power of the deep-sea overlord Black Narwhal is something I have never seen before. This ship will become truly famous in the future, Jun whispered with some emotion. In the past, the Black Narwhal was also very famous, but most of its fame was because it was the flagship of Orgrim and represented the face of the Warhammer pirates. But purely as a battleship, it is nothing special. But from today on, it may become the world's strongest battleship. As long as the legendary ancient weapon Pluto is not born, the Black Narwhal can become the overlord of the deep sea. Sister, what should we do now? The Navy lieutenant asked. Stay close to Butter Island, which will soon become the center of war, Jun said without hesitation. The naval lieutenant commander quickly responded, yes, eldest sister. It did not sail into the port, but approached the coastline directly from the side of the island. Then, Orgrim and others all jumped from the deck onto the island. Then the Black Narwhal quickly began to dive, and soon it quickly disappeared. Not long after, Newgate's large fleet also caught up here. Orgrim stood on the beach on the coast and laughed loudly. Gee ha 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 ha, the strongest man, dare you go to the island and fight. On the Moby Dick, Newgate was holding the Conjunky, with a touch of excitement in his eyes. After hearing Orgrim's words, he also laughed. Cool la 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 la, as you wish, Orgrim, Newgate laughed loudly. At the same time as the words fell, Newgate exerted force on his feet and jumped out of the ship more than 100 meters away. The Conjunky in his hand brought with it a concussive force, and the blade moved wherever he passed. The space was shattered. The moment Newgate took action, Orgrim raised his hand and said softly, it's gone. To each his own. As soon as he finished speaking, Beckman and others who were standing beside him all distanced themselves from Orgrim. At the same time, Newgate also fell from the sky with majestic momentum. Whispering sound, Orgrim sneered, raised the warhammer in his hand suddenly, and faced it with a blow without hesitation. Open! Orgrim roared. Drink! Newgate also roared angrily. The warhammer and Kongyunki collided together instantly. In just one moment, everyone on Butter Island seemed to feel the ground shaking violently. Then, two powerful forces, the momentum erupted from the coastline and swept the entire island in an instant. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 385. Thunder Gossip. Kaido had returned to his original human form at this time, and the mace in his hand suddenly hit Charlotte Lingling. The speed of this blow was extremely fast, and it can also be regarded as Kaido's famous stunt. It seems like that little guy Yamato knows how to use it, but he still can't master it. This blow will almost blow the head of 5 Emperors Luffy in the future, and he will be killed instantly. It also made Luffy change his name to Wang Luffy. Although Kaido is very big, in fact, his speed is not slow at all. At the level of Kaido and Orgrim, there are no obvious shortcomings in him. After that, he will slowly improve in an all-round way. Process. Thunder Bagua focuses on the word thunder, which means that this attack has thunderous speed and thunderous power. The future 5 Emperors Luffy cannot be stopped. But Charlotte Lingling is not a rookie. She and Kaido were once on the same boat, and their power levels were on the same level. It was impossible for them not to be able to see clearly their moves. When Kaido's mace attacked, the Emperor's sword in Charlotte Lingling's hand also burned with flames, and she roared broken blade. The flaming sword collided with Kaido's mace. Together, with a muffled sound, the two of them took a step back at the same time, and the force they released directly shattered the ground. Lingling, you are making progress. Kaido laughed loudly and said. Not bad, you idiot, Charlotte Lingling said with a gloomy face. The moment she finished speaking, Charlotte Lingling suddenly rushed forward, raised her hand and punched Kaido. Soul critical attack. Electricity and flames erupted on Charlotte Lingling's arm. The power of this blow seemed to be very powerful. Kaido had no intention of taking it, and his body was very agile, and he pulled away from Charlotte Lingling again. A piece. Sure enough, Soul Crit hit the ground with a punch, and cracks tens of meters long spread directly. This place looked like it had been bombarded by hundreds of artillery rounds, and gravel flew everywhere. You weird old woman, Kaido cursed, rushed out of the smoke, raised his hand and hit Charlotte Lingling on the head with a mallet. Charlotte Lingling also showed no signs of weakness. She wrapped her arms with domineering force and punched from the bottom up, hitting Kaido's mallet directly. The armed and domineering confrontation instantly broke out between the two people, blowing away the original smoke and dust. Asshole, Charlotte Lingling also cursed. At the same time, the power of her soul gathered on her arms again, and Kaido's body began to grow fine dragon scales. But at this moment, two powerful auras erupted from the coast of the island. Then, the entire island shook slightly. At this moment, Kaido and Charlotte Lingling stopped their hands at the same time, suppressed their original strength, and took a few steps back from each other. This breath, Newgate. Charlotte Lingling's eyes lit up and she said. Ah ha ha ha, my brother Orgrim has arrived. Kaido also laughed loudly and said. You idiot, don't you really think that Orgrim can defeat that old guy from Newgate? Don't you know how strong he is? Charlotte Lingling mocked in a deep voice. Hey, Lingling, have you seen Orgrim? Kaido asked with great disdain. Charlotte Lingling frowned slightly, but still shook her head frankly. That's right, despite the fact that this dead old woman has been entangled with Orgrim for so many years, both parties there have been countless battles, but in fact, until now, Charlotte Lingling has never seen Orgrim in person. Likewise, Orgrim has never seen her. That's right, it's just because you haven't met him that you don't understand. Some people cannot be measured by common sense. Kaido laughed loudly and said as if he was very confident in Orgrim's strength. A hint of impatience flashed in Charlotte Lingling's eyes, and when she was about to take action, two forces suddenly erupted in the distance. A shock and an impact, these two forces were entangled together, breaking through all the obstacles in the way, plowing a ravine more than 10 meters deep on the ground, and destroying countless things. Kaido swung the mace in his hand and hit the concussive force directly with the hammer, blocking this wanton release of power. The Emperor's sword in Charlotte Lingling's hand also slashed out with one strike, directly cutting open the impact. The aftermath? Those two superhumans are really awesome, Kaido whispered softly. At the same time, Orgrim and Newgate were already engaged in a fierce battle. The aftermath can be vented to Kaido and Charlotte Lingling. One can imagine how ferocious the battlefield the two of them were on looked like. The dense forest in the distance was already in a mess, and the sand was flying on the beach. The clouds in the sky were constantly being shredded and torn apart. It was extremely miserable. Under the ground, there are all cracked abyss, and it is almost impossible to stand within 1,000 meters. The sea outside the coastline was simply terrifying. The waves of the tsunami spread outward one after another. The force of the impact fried the sea surface like a cooked oil pan. The turbulent ocean currents collided together, forming huge spiral nests that spread across the entire sea area. The domineering clash of their weapons and abilities caused the space to shatter into pieces, and black lightning pierced the air from time to time. Even beings with the strength of Beckman and Marco can hardly get too close to those two people, because the power of shock and impact seems to be spreading continuously as if it is free of charge. If you look down from a high altitude, you can see that centered on the place where Orgrim and Newgate fought, the ground is rapidly collapsing and spreading. This is the power that can destroy the island. Just the aftermath can bring absolute damage to the environment. Fortunately, Butter Island is very big and can hold on for the time being. Drink, Orgrim shouted, and held Newgate's Kongyunki with the warhammer in his hand. Then, he raised his hand and punched Newgate's chest. A powerful impact was condensed on his fist. This blow will probably beat the huge sea kings directly into pulp. Newgate couldn't press Kongyunki in his hand. After seeing Orgrim's punch, he also raised his arm. There was condensation here, and he punched Orgrim's arm. The two huge forces collided together again. The impact and concussion are the top superhuman powers. Their essence is simple, rough, and wild. With just one blow, the space between the two men exploded, and another invisible explosion force came here, forcing Orgrim and Newgate to distance themselves. This feeling, both of them were very uncomfortable. This was not the first time that Newgate had shattered space, nor was it the first time that he had fought against a master of Orgrim's level. Roger and Shiji were both inferior to Orgrim at their peak. Grim was worse. But this feeling of space explosion was the first time he had experienced it in so many years. It had happened once before during a naval battle, but Newgate didn't pay attention to it at the time. Now, as long as the force of vibration collided with Orgrim's force of impact, and it exploded, as if the space was particularly unstable. There was no time to think about anything. Newgate only thought that the force of shock and force of shock were produced at this time. The changes were the same. Orgrim didn't think much about it. Unlike Newgate, he hardly broke the space and just regarded it as a normal phenomenon. But the two of them didn't know that whenever they felt when this kind of invisible space explosion occurs, in a random corner of the world, there will be a direct explosion of shock and impact. During the time when the two of them were fighting, 3 countries had already suffered, and even some they are all scattered across the 4 seas, thousands of miles away from them. At Marine Headquarters Marineford, the Warring States General is sitting in his office at this time. He is sitting on the sofa very calmly with a cup of tea in his hand. Was looking through the documents on the table. After reading for a while, the Warring States General seemed to be distracted and began to be in a daze. After a long time, he came back to his senses and said to himself, also I don't know what the situation is like over there in the New World. But although he was very curious, Warring States also knew that he couldn't control so much. Shaking his head, he took another sip of tea and prepared to lower his head and continue working on these documents. At this moment, the office door was pushed open by someone. Without even raising his head, Zhang Guo said angrily, Garp, let me remind you again. Next time before you enter, can you knock politely, knock on the door. Ha 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 ha, what? Are you afraid that I will catch you doing something bad? Garp said with a smile. Yes, in the entire Navy headquarters, Garp is the only one who dares to rush directly into his Warring States General's office without knocking on the door. Even the Marine Marshal Cyborg will do it naturally. Knock on the door. I am a naval admiral, what bad things can I do? The Warring States General couldn't help but curse. But before he finished speaking, his expression suddenly changed. Not only him, but also Garp, who was eating senbei, his face turned dark instantly. Enemy attack, Garp and Sengoku thought at the same time. Before this idea could be settled, the space in General Sengoku's office suddenly exploded, and two tyrannical forces were vented here inexplicably. Whitebeard, after the Warring States General felt this familiar power, he said in shock and anger. Orgrim, Garp also exclaimed. Warring States instinctively raised his arm, and struck out with the palm toward the burst of power. His palm instantly turned golden, and a powerful impact exploded directly. The next moment, the entire Admiral's office exploded. Sengoku and Garp were blown away by the powerful air pressure and the impact of the space explosion. Together, they blasted out of Marineford's Fortress of Justice and rolled several times in the air. The circle hit the square directly. Then the two people quickly got up, and their domineering auras suddenly covered the entire Marineford. But soon, the expressions of Garp and Sengoku became confused. No more, the breath was gone, and the power of shock and impact seemed to have never appeared. If it weren't for the fact that a big hole really exploded on the roof of the building, Warring States would have thought he was dreaming. What's happening here? Garp couldn't help but ask. For a moment just now, he thought that maybe the war in the New World was a conspiracy. Newgate and Orgrim teamed up to break into the Navy headquarters. After a breath passed, what? None of it happened. After hearing Garp's question, the Warring States General also shook his head in confusion and said, I don't know, but the two powers just now are definitely the bastard Orgrim and the Newgate one. Guy. You may not believe it. I was drinking tea in the office during the Warring States period, and suddenly Newgate and Orgrim beat me up. On Butter Island, at this time Orgrim and Newgate they also stopped their movements in a tacit understanding. The domineering aura of the two people also quickly enveloped the entire island and even most of the sea. Both sides looked very serious and searched for something. But after a while, Orgrim's face became strange and confused. He looked at Newgate not far away and found that Newgate was also looking at him with a frown. You feel it? Orgrim asked directly. Newgate didn't hide anything and nodded and said, I really feel the aura of those two bastard Marines, Garp and Sengoku. Orgrim nodded. Yes, he felt it at that moment just now, and he also caught an impact force that penetrated out but did not belong to him. It feels a bit familiar, and when I think about it more carefully, isn't this the power of that naval admiral from the Warring States period? So at the same time, both he and Newgate chose to stop. I also wondered in my heart, had the Navy bosses already laid out an ambush and arrangement? That's why there was a scene where the two of them searched the entire island and sea area with a tacit understanding of knowledge and domineering. But nothing was found. I didn't find it. What about you? Orgrim didn't feel embarrassed and asked directly. If the Navy really had any arrangements here, he would not be able to continue fighting Newgate. Newgate also shook his head and said, I nor. Strange, Orgrim frowned and murmured in confusion. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 386. After passing through the chaotic Butter Island, Morgans came to a messy jungle with a camera in his hand. Jumped over several abyss ravines where the ground cracked. Morgan stopped behind a fallen tree. His face was a little excited, his eyes were shining, and he couldn't help but whisper, "I found it." But soon, he frowned slightly, feeling a little strange. Before he arrived here, he could feel that the fighting here was illegally fierce. The entire Butter Island was shaking from time to time, with powerful energy shock and catharsis. Run around the island. But after entering the dense forest, the movement stopped. Morgans did not doubt that the battle between Orgrim and Newgate had already been decided. Because that was impossible, how long did the fight last? Be it Orgrim or Newgate, they are both the top players in the world. The battle between them must last for 3 days and 3 nights. How can they decide who is better? Therefore, Morgans only thought that something unexpected happened here. But after I came and observed it, I found that there was nothing surprising. There were no other masters on the sea interfering. Although they were far away and could not see clearly, they could still see the 2 figures standing in the distance. They were the white-bearded Edward Nyoga, who was known as the strongest man in the world. Special, and the king of the night in the eternal night sea, Hosgarot Orgrim. "Why don't you fight?" Morgan smacked his lips strangely. Then, he picked up the camera and put it in front of his eyes. Then he rubbed the teeth on it and adjusted the focus. With the help of the camera, he finally narrowed the distance. And saw the appearance of Orgrim and Newgate clearly. They were right, they seemed to be talking about something. Just when Morgans was scratching his head and feeling anxious, he suddenly became excited again. Because Orgrim and Newgate moved. The warhammer flipped in his hand, pulling out a flower shadow in the air, and Orgrim attacked Newgate again. Although I don't know what happened just now, why did the aura of the warring states appear in it? On the battlefield, he could not find his whereabouts even though he saw and heard about it. Orgrim and Newgate couldn't be frightened into not taking action just because of such an aura, right? So after some exchanges, they took action again in perfect agreement. Newgate suddenly took a step forward, and the Kong Yunkai in his hand brought out a transparent vibrating force, and slashed towards Orgrim. The impact force on the warhammer and Kong Yunkai struck. The shocking power of the 2 staggered together, causing an explosion of energy in an instant. But Orgrim and Newgate had already become accustomed to it, and there was no pause at all. Orgrim changed from holding the hammer with 2 hands to 1 hand. Then, he pushed an elbow into Newgate's abdomen and said, "Tyrannosaurus charging elbow." Newgate is taller than Orgrim. At this time, he wants to free his hands and holds the knife with 1 hand, but he can't come back. But how rich is his fighting experience? A transparent energy ring suddenly appeared on his knees. Raised up with a knee strike. The knee just collided with Orgrim's elbow strike. Orgrim only felt a trembling force from his elbow, which made his arm numb and his insides shook. Akira. But at this time, he was no longer the same person as before, and he was not injured. Newgate also felt a pain in his knee, and the powerful force of the impact kept squeezing towards him. Open, Newgate suddenly threw the cloud cutter in his hand into the sky, freeing his hands. To be honest, when Newgate fights with people like Orgrim, the sword and the warhammer may be able to enhance the attack power, but in close combat, it is also somewhat worrying, which makes them unable to use it. On the contrary, putting aside the weapons, they are more fierce. Freeing up his hands, Newgate stood on 1 foot on the ground, his knees were against Orgrim's elbow, his arms suddenly opened, and a powerful shock force instantly condensed on his fists. Air shock and cracking, Newgate shouted loudly. His 2 fists were like cannonballs, one left and one right, hitting Orgrim's head directly. "Don't underestimate me, you bastard," Orgrim roared. He did not dodge. He threw the war hammer directly with his other hand and turned his palm into a fist. There was a powerful impact on the fist, and he hit Newton with a fierce blow. Gates' abdomen. When the two men started this action, due to the change in body width, the elbow and knee strikes were all released. Several staggered, Orgrim's waist twisted, and the punch was 3 points stronger. Newgate's feet landed on the ground, and his figure became more stable. Before the attacks from both sides fell, the armed domineering energy of both men suddenly concentrated. Orgrim's head became extremely black, like an iron block, and Newgate's abdomen is even more condensed with a black metallic luster. Boom! At the same time, a dull sound came from the two of them. Newgate's face flushed a little, and his straight white crescent beard began to tremble. Then he loosened the corner of his mouth and couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Orgrim punched him in the abdomen. The powerful force contained in it was estimated to be able to directly crush an island the size of a ship, but Newgate only spit out a mouthful of blood. Feeling the powerful impact of power in his body, Newgate couldn't help but take a step back. The powerful power seemed to have found its outlet and burst out from under his feet. The ground behind him exploded in an instant, and the force coming from under his feet roared and ran backwards for dozens of meters, opening a dark ravine. At the same time, Orgrim was hit twice on the head by Newgate. His eyes darkened, as if he was blind. Then, his nose and mouth felt filled with the smell of blood, and his head went blank when he tried to retrieve his thoughts. But it was only for a moment. The shocking force that hit his head instantly penetrated his body. Armed and domineering? Useful, but not very useful. It felt like his whole body was being torn apart. This pain stimulated Orgrim's nerves, causing his thoughts to return to his body and his eyes to regain vision. The world seemed to be blood-red and a little blurry. But it can be seen that the person standing in front of him is Newgate. Newgate just happened to spit out the blood and couldn't help but take a step back. The same is true for Orgrim. He urgently needs to expel the trembling power that is constantly raging in his body. Following the same step, he took a step back. The ground was crushed by this foot, and cracks exploded within a few dozen meters behind him. With these two punches from Newgate, it is estimated that he can directly destroy Marineford's Fortress of Justice. But Orgrim was only injured. He shook his head violently, but his vision was still bloody and blurry. Orgrim knew that it was probably caused by severe congestion caused by his eyes being injured. But he didn't care about this. As soon as he stabilized his body, he roared and rushed towards Newgate again. With this pounce, the momentum on his body was like that of a tiger descending from a mountain, and his domineering aura couldn't help but burst out. The more ferocious the battle, the more the violent factor in Orgrim's body is agitated. The blood of the troll is flowing in his body. Isn't it just a head-on confrontation? Who is the grandson? Orgrim obviously doesn't mind this kind of fighting method. If Newgate really wants to play like this, then in less than a day, Orgrim will be confident to end the battle and win. Because his physical fitness is much stronger than Newgate. Newgate is naturally not a fool. He just received a punch from Orgrim, which was considered as a test and a means of confrontation. But it doesn't mean that he will use this rough method to decide the outcome with Orgrim. He also knows that with Orgrim's almost invincible physique, if you fight him like this, anyone else will lose. Even the strongest man is of no use. Therefore, when Orgrim's overbearing lust exploded, he rushed toward him like a tiger descending a mountain. Newgate moved and he chose to avoid it. That's right, in a head-on confrontation, Newgate chose to retreat in the second move. Although knowledgeable people know that Newgate's choice is absolutely correct, and it is not a weak choice, but a reasonable choice. But from the perspective of Morgans, who was taking pictures in the distance, it looked like Orgrim was confronting Newgate and instantly gained the upper hand. Yes, although Morgan's is pretty good, he is a pen, not a gun. So you can't see much at all. Excitedly, he captured the moment when Orgrim was powerful and forced back Newgate. Morgan suppressed the excitement in his heart and said, "Big news, big news. Khazgaro's Orgrim can now fight head-on, get rid of the grey beard." Newgate took a step back, and the domineering aura on his body also exploded, blocking Ogre instantly. After that surging momentum, Kong Yunki, who had just been thrown into the air, just fell down. Stretching out his hands, he grabbed the handle of the knife back and forth. Using this step back, Newgate slashed the blade downwards with a powerful force that seemed to knock Orgrim directly. Like splitting with a knife. Ning Kong wave howling tiger, Orgrim clasped his arms in front of his chest, raised his hand and struck the big sword Kong Yunkai of Newgate with his flesh and blood with the force of impact. The force of impact came from both of his palms. It burst out, and a ferocious and domineering tiger descended from the mountain, instantly condensed in the void. The tiger roared and bit directly on the blade of Newgate's cloud-cutting blade. With a click, the space exploded again. But this time, Newgate and Orgrim seemed to be prepared. The moment the space exploded, the two of them changed their moves in unison. The shock force brought by the strong arms tore some of the space on the surface of the skin, covering it with dense black cracks. Newgate's punch swept out and hit Orgrim's body. At the same time, the moment Orgrim stabilized his body, a powerful impact force was also carried on his arms. His left arm turned into a dragon, and his right arm turned into a tiger. Tigers roar and dragons roar. Orgrim roared angrily. Split the sky, Newgate also roared. When the two attacks converged, dazzling white light burst out from them instantly, covering the two figures. Then, with the two of them as the center, a powerful the impact and shocking power seemed to be combined together, turning into tumbling airflow, sticking to the ground and spreading outward. Everything on the ground was swept away, and the seawater outside the coastline was swept away by this. The power squeezed out and turned into a tsunami again. Morgan's eyes were filled with shock, and then without saying a word, he turned around and ran away. He was not even 100 meters away when he was directly hit by this powerful rolling force. Got sucked in. Not good, Morgan's wailed in horror. At this critical moment, his first choice was to protect the camera in his arms. His whole body was wrapped in armed domineering, and he was carried away by the wave of power. The elephant is invisible and the sound is loud. For a moment, everyone on the island seemed to feel something. The movements of their hands paused for a moment, but soon they fell into a fierce battle again. "This is," Sphinx held Gatlin in her hand and looked at the wave of energy sweeping behind her. The entire Lolita was stunned. "Go quickly," Enilu said without hesitation, then transformed into lightning and disappeared on the spot. "You bastard, you are so heartless," the Sphinx cursed loudly. Then, the Sphinx's arms and legs instantly turned into four spiked round shields, and they suddenly closed inward and turned into a shield ball, armed with color. The domineering power covered it again. As soon as this action was completed, the powerful wave of energy directly swept the Sphinx into it. "Biscuit," Cracker shouted loudly. The appearance of General Biscuit instantly condensed on his body, but before he could attach the armed domineering energy to it, the wave of energy had already swept out. In just an instant, the cookie crumbs flew out. The wave of energy that exploded when Orgrim and Newgate fought with all their strength swept across a third of Butter Island, almost completely destroying the environment more than 10 kilometers inward from the southeastern coast. If you look down from a high altitude, you can see that the southeastern area of Butter Island has become very flat at this time, and the color is very uniform, that is, the burnt yellow of the soil. Everything that was originally covered was completely washed away. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 387. When the waves subside. The figures of Orgrim and Newgate gradually emerged from the central area. At this time, the two of them still maintained the posture of fighting just now. Orgrim's hands grasped Newgate's thick arms. The ground beneath their feet did not have any cracks. On the contrary, it was so smooth that no gaps could be seen. If the Sphinx came over and fired at the ground now, he would find that the bullets would not penetrate. It has been compacted and is as solid as a steel plate. Two of Orgrim's fingers were broken, one of which was visible to the naked eye. The knuckles of his middle finger pierced his skin, and the pale phalanges were exposed to the air with their flesh and blood. But there was a ferocious smile on the corner of his mouth. On Newgate's arm, a piece of flesh and blood was torn open, and in the middle of the forearm, the bones under the muscles could even be seen. But there was also an unruly smile on his face. However, the next moment, the smiles on both of their faces faded away at the same time, and then a flush returned to their originally pale faces. Then the two of them took 5 steps back at the same time. Every time they took a step back, a deep footprint was left on the solid ground. When the two of them stabilized their bodies, a stream of blood flowed from the corners of their mouths at the same time. Then, the breath on my body became slightly weaker. Cough, Orgrim coughed, then spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground, feeling that his breath became much easier. Then he looked at Newgate and laughed. Don't hold it in. There are no outsiders here. Wouldn't it make you feel embarrassed to spit out a mouthful of blood in front of me? Newgate also smiled when he heard this. Yes. There are no outsiders, at least within 10 kilometers, no one can exist, they have all been driven away. After laughing, Newgate opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. Coo la 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 la, so happy. Newgate laughed. Orgrim used his right hand to twist the fingers of his left hand to connect the bones. Then, he grabbed the middle finger of his right hand with his left hand and glanced at the severed finger hanging on the back of his hand. It seemed that only the epidermis was still attached. His expression did not change at all, as if it was not his finger at all. A self-deprecating smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he pulled hard and completely cut off the broken middle finger. Pulled off. You old guy's shocking fruit, it's really awesome. Orgrim chuckled. Then, he pinched the severed finger with his palm, and the force of the impact burst out, crushing the severed finger into bloody mud. Newgate glanced at it. His own bloody arm also sneered. You bastard, the impact fruit is also very good. Is the tiger coming out of the mountain? Orgrim did not answer, but looked at the still turbulent sea in the distance. The sun had already sunk half under the sea. You should know that when it gets dark, I will still be stronger. Then, Whitebeard, Orgrim was talking and suddenly shouted loudly. A smile appeared on the corner of Newgate's lips. Before he could speak, Orgrim laughed loudly and said, that was your strongest posture just now. Yet, in the case of, so from today on, I will accept your reputation as the strongest. Newgate flicked Kongyunki in his hand, and it fell directly to the ground. Then he laughed very boldly and said, Coo la 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 la, kid, don't be too arrogant, it was just a warm-up. What a coincidence, so is I, Orgrim said with a ferocious smile on his lips. After this exchange, neither of them spoke, and the atmosphere became silent for a while. However, the aura of the two people that had just declined due to injuries was restored. It began to climb gradually. No one moved, but the momentum of this movement had already caused a strong sense of oppression. The steel-like ground cracked again, and the sparse clouds in the sky were affected by the momentum of the two men. The influence actually began to condense. After the condensation was completed, the thick clouds began to keep lowering, and there were even electric lights flashing inside. It seemed to be cheering for the two kings of the sea. The rough sea gradually began to calm down, the swirling vortex slowly disappeared, and the tsunami began to calm down. Newgate looked at Orgrim's resolute face and whispered with some emotion, you are so young. Orgrim also said with some emotion, "You are not old yet." "Cool la 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 la, I can still fight for another 20 years, Newgate suddenly laughed boldly. Then, before Orgrim could speak, Newgate looked at the sinking sun on the sea level in the distance, and said softly, "Wait a minute, just let me see how strong you can be. Are you so confident? Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to cover it?" Orgrim asked with a grin. "Ha ha, who do you think I am? I have a white beard," Newgate said with a smile. Although the fight was fierce and Orgrim lost all his fingers, it must be said that there was no personal enmity between him and Newgate, it was just a battle of positions. On the contrary, he still admired Newgate. After Roger's death, he became the king of the sea. He stood in front of the throne and achieved his own hegemony. In this era, he is worthy of the word Whitebeard. But this man, he has many problems, and these problems may become his weaknesses. He is the strongest man now, which is fine, but in the future, each other will become his fatal injury. But, these problems make him appear so charming. Being able to calmly wait here for Orgrim to enter his strongest state is his fault and his charm. His atmosphere is always so upright. He is always upright and domineering. This is the measure of Whitebeard. Ha ha, is this the arrogance of being the strongest? Orgrim smiled and said. Since Newgate is willing to wait, Orgrim is not willing to ruin his kindness. That's right, Newgate responded very calmly. His tone was indeed arrogant, but he has the qualifications. Very good, then as a respect for my opponent, I will go all out when the night falls. Orgrim's aura was full of righteousness. That is the best response to my expectations, Newgate also grinned and said. The sea breeze blew by, and the captain's cloak on Newgate's shoulders moved with the wind. At this moment, the last ray of sunlight fell on the sea level. The world seemed to darken all of a sudden, the night fell, and the air became 3 cents colder. At the same time, the hearts of the masters on Butter Island had some changes. There is no doubt that Orgrim is on the island. And Orgrim's combat effectiveness can be enhanced in the dark night. This is already a consensus on the sea. This is also one of the reasons why he is called the King of the Night. There are even people on the sea. Rumor has it that no one in the Evernight Sea can defeat Husgaroth Orgrim in his prime state. The day belongs to Newgate, the night belongs to Orgrim. This sentence is also recognized by many people in the New World. However, Orgrim has not really rectified his name before this. Now, the night has arrived, and Newgate is also on the island. Whether the statement can truly be true seems to depend on the present day. From among the ruins, a slender arm stretched out, and then the grey-faced figure of the Sphinx climbed out of the ruins. She cursed a few words at first, then looked up at the sky. At this time, she could already see some stars. It's dark, is Master Chui going to show his true strength? The Sphinx whispered to himself softly. After muttering a few words, the Sphinx patted the dust on his body, and said with an evil smile on his lips, "Sure enough, it's more comfortable when it's dark." That's right, it's not just Orgrim who can become stronger in the dark. In fact, most of the cotters of the Warhammer pirates feel this way now. It's just that they are not as perverted as Orgrim. As for why, the reason is very simple, just because of habit. They have been in Avalon for so many years and have long been accustomed to the darkness. It was somewhat uncomfortable to suddenly move in broad daylight. In the dark night, the strength of other people will be affected to some extent, but the people of Avalon feel like a duck in water. Isn't this an enhancement when it comes out and in? Newgate was looking at Orgrim with some surprise at this time, because he saw that dark power seemed to be faintly surging in Orgrim, as if it was some strange devil fruit. Average ability. Newgate wanted to ask before, but now he finally couldn't help but ask. Orgrim, what is your ability? Could it be that you are the legendary dual fruit ability user? Newgate asked. Orgrim was in a good mood at this time. He could feel that the power in his body was particularly strong. In view of Newgate's boldness and power before, Orgrim did not hide anything and said directly, "No, although there have been rumors in the sea about people with double fruit abilities, in fact, I have never seen any of them. Maybe there will be such wizards in the future, but I am not. I am just a gifted person. Ever since I was a kid." Newgate nodded slightly and then said, "Perhaps the blood flowing in your body is very special. It has strong self-healing power and can improve its strength in the dark. In the ancient times, there were many strange races. They have all disappeared in history. Maybe you have some of their blood in you." Orgrim did not explain anything, and said with a grin, "Maybe you are right, but this is not worth exploring. Cool la 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 la, I'm just a little curious. I've asked, are you ready?" Newgate laughed loudly and said, "I feel so good now." Orgrim laughed loudly. To be honest, when he fought with Newgate before, Orgrim was not in very good condition. It's not like he was injured or anything like that. It's just that before, most of the time, he was in Avalon, and in Avalon, Orgrim maintained an extremely powerful state almost all the time. Therefore, fighting suddenly in the daytime would give the illusion of weakness. Although it is an illusion, it does have an impact. Now, Orgrim has regained that sense of familiarity in Avalon. Then come on, let me see what you, who are clamoring to take away from me as the strongest, are capable of." Newgate grabbed the big knife Kongyunki in his hand and pointed it at Orgrim. "Gee ha 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 ha, if you want to see it, I'll show it to you. Don't let me down, you are the strongest." Orgrim laughed loudly. The moment the words fell, a force suddenly exploded under Orgrim's feet, and the ground as solid as steel collapsed directly. His figure pulled out several pieces on the way. The phantom was so fast that the pupils in Newgate's eyes shrank slightly. "So fast," Newgate said in shock. "But as the strongest man, it's not like he can't keep up. He couldn't dodge in time." Newgate's Kongyunkai was suddenly placed across his chest, and his arm domineering energy instantly covered it. The next moment, Orgrim's iron fist had already hit the hilt of the Kongyunki. As one of the 12 great treasures, the quality of the Kongyunki was so good that it exploded, and there was almost no chance of it being destroyed. Possibility. But even so, the power covered with arm domineering force still bent inward under Orgrim's punch. The powerful force of impact continued to bombard Newgate on Te's knife. However, what exploded was only for a moment. Newgate only felt that the force coming from his hand was much greater than during the previous fight. The ground beneath his feet shattered directly, and then, under the power of this punch, during the process, he was unable to block Orgrim's power. With a look of surprise in his eyes, his foot slipped and his whole body was punched out. He flew back more than 200 meters into the air. Newgate his feet stepped on the ground again. But there was still a strong force continuing, and his feet wiped out 2 deep ravine marks on the ground. After retreating dozens of meters, Newgate finally stabilized. Figure, looking at Orgrim's figure solemnly. His hands were a little numb, and his arms were a little sore. "What a powerful force," Newgate said with a sinking heart. "Gee ha 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 ha. With my full strength, can I satisfy you that I am the strongest?" Orgrim laughed arrogantly. His tone was so arrogant. And Newgate quickly laughed, waved Kongyunki in his hand, stood beside him, looked at Orgrim and said, "Just trying to force it on, if that's all, I won't be able to get the reputation of being the strongest. Please give me flowers and monthly tickets, big guys." A Sledgehammer Breaks into Pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 388. Gee ha 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 ha, still so arrogant. Orgrim laughed loudly. The moment the words fell, his figure moved again, faster, with a scarlet color in his eyes, pulling out a red light in the dark night. Newgate his heart sank, and Kong Yunki slashed out with a knife in his hand. Too slow, Orgrim shouted low, his foot slipped, his figure passed by the blade, and he squeezed his hand suddenly. The force of the impact instantly wrapped around his hand, and he punched Newgate in the heart. Go up. Don't be so arrogant, kid. Newgate's arm suddenly shrank, forming a hook shape to block his chest. His arm domineering energy directly entered the second stage, and the invisible armor instantly covered it. The next moment, Orgrim's punch had hit the top. A dull impact sounded. Newgate's face turned pale, his feet were loosened again, and he flew directly upside down. This time, perhaps because of the angle, he did not fly upside down at a low altitude, but was hit to the sky. Without waiting for him to react, Orgrim stepped on his own speed and suddenly braked. The ground cracked, and at the same time, the sound of sonic boom came from him looking again. His figure had disappeared from the ground and caught up with Newgate in the air. The sigh of the Dragon King. Orgrim shouted in the air. Dazzling white light condensed on his arms, cutting through the darkness in the sky. The next second, a ferocious dragon appeared in the sky above Butter Island. With a roar, the dragon roared and crashed into Newgate in the air. Newgate flew upside down in the air, and the Kong Yunki in his hand suddenly swung upwards, bringing with it a shocking force that tore the space into pieces. At the same time, he also roared angrily, extreme earthquake and annihilation. Unparalleled trembling power burst out from his hands, and the powerful force blocked the dragon. In the sky, two extremely powerful forces collided, covering the entire night in an instant, and everyone looked up and looked there. Then, the invisible energy exploded like a mushroom cloud. Newgate's figure was swept by the air wave and flew back again. At the same time, the pupils in his eyes shrank again because he saw the corner of Orgrim's mouth. With a crazy and bloodthirsty smile, he rushed out from the center of the surging energy explosion. There were blood stains everywhere on the guy's body, and there were torn wounds and flesh on his chest. You could even see the wounds in front of his chest. White bones. Newgate didn't believe that his blow just now could hit Orgrim so hard. It was already good enough to offset Orgrim's Dragon King's sigh. So there is no doubt that this bastard rushed into the energy by himself. In the explosion, he was injured. How crazy and cruel is this? The speed is too fast. Newgate seemed to have directly entered a state of being beaten throughout the whole process, with almost no chance to seize the opportunity and take the initiative. He was too late. Adjusting his body shape, Orgrim had already rushed in front of him and kicked him down violently. He grabbed Kong Yunki with one hand, and his arms were attached with the power of arm domineering, and he crossed them in front of his chest. Then, Orgrim stepped on it with his powerful foot. Then, there was another sonic boom. Newgate felt that his arm was about to break. His body withstood this force and exploded like a cannonball towards he arrived at the center of Butter Island. There was a castle there, which seemed to be the place where Charlotte Lingling held her tea party. Unable to resist this force, Newgate's figure directly hit the castle in the midst of everyone's incredible gazes. On the ground, the huge castle collapsed directly, instantly collapsing into ruins. Then, the ground began to crack, and countless cracks spread out like spider webs, covering a radius of 1 kilometer. Gee ha 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 ha, Orgrim laughed in the air first, and then the wild, violent, and ferocious aura enveloped the entire island. Who else? Orgrim roared angrily. At this moment, he seemed to have really become the king of the night, dominating the world in this dark night. Charlotte Lingling was stunned at this time, looking at the night sky in stunned silence. Orgrim on the sky, the bright moon, seems to have become his background, making his ferocious posture even more invincible. When the voice of who else fell, the overlord on Orgrim's body seemed to be his background. The domineering energy burst out involuntarily. The entire island was silent. In this world, the night belongs to Khazgaro's Orgrim. These words suddenly broke into the hearts of everyone who witnessed the scene just now. Their eyes were cold. After scanning the people on the ground, Orgrim finally stared at the huge figure of Charlotte Lingling. The moment she was stared at by Orgrim's crazy and evil eyes, Charlotte Lingling seemed she felt a shock to her soul. This made her incredible, because others had always been afraid of her, Charlotte Lingling, and she, Charlotte Lingling, had never been afraid of anyone. Yes, she was fearless, although she found Kaido and Orgrim difficult to deal with, and although she also thought that she might mess up and lose, she had never been afraid. But at this moment, she felt a little guilty. Fortunately, Charlotte Lingling is also one of the top masters in the world today. She was only slightly shocked before she calmed down and looked at Orgrim without hesitation. Her eyes were full of fighting intent. As the sea thieves, they are all lonely, because there are too few worthy opponents in the world. This is the loneliness of heroes. An evil and bloodthirsty smile appeared on the corner of Orgrim's mouth, the aura on his body began to rise again. But just when he was about to attack Charlotte Lingling, a powerful concussive force at earth erupted from the ruins of the castle. It hit the air directly. Orgrim wrapped his arms domineeringly and punched out, blocking the concussive force. Then, I saw the strong figure of the Newgate guy walking out of the trash. He ripped off the somewhat dilapidated and embarrassed captain's cloak from his shoulders. He reached out and flicked the dust on his beard again, and looked at Orgrim high in the sky with piercing eyes. There were some bruises on Newgate's arm, which appeared to be Orgrim's footprints. But he doesn't care. Pooh. Newgate spat out a mouthful of bruises on the ground, then raised the corners of his mouth and laughed, "Coo la 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 la, is this the extent?" Before Orgrim could speak, as soon as the words fell, Newgate suddenly burst out with an extremely powerful momentum. At this moment, the strongest man in the world showed his true ability. The ground started to tremble, and the amplitude was getting bigger and bigger. The space also began to tremble. The clouds in the sky were lower and higher. Newgate's domineering aura swept over the whole place. He raised an arm and stretched out. He pointed in the direction of Orgrim, and then pinched. With a click, the space shattered, and Orgrim felt a powerful vibration force around him, squeezing towards his body from all directions. "Gee ha 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 ha, don't underestimate me," Orgrim laughed loudly. The impact force on his body exploded without any blind spots, directly dissipating the power. As he finished speaking, Orgrim fell from the sky with unparalleled momentum, and the impact force in his hand. The force became stronger and stronger, and he slammed into Newgate. This time, Newgate did not choose to defend. Instead, he lowered his waist and assumed a posture as if "I am going to confront you." Right at Orgrim's when the figure burst into 10 meters in front of Newgate, Newgate's pupils suddenly flashed with light. The next second, the entire Butter Island bounced. Within 3 meters of Newgate, there appeared a square transparent energy cube directly enveloped him inside. The moment Orgrim punched him, he felt a sharp pain in his arm, and the force of the impact dissipated directly. Then, his whole body he bounced out and danced in the air several times. After landing, he took another 10 steps back. Each step cracked the ground and relieved a lot of force. Then, he looked at Newgate with some surprise. "Te's strong figure," exclaimed in disbelief, awakening. "How? As the strongest man, I have awakened my own abilities. Isn't it strange? How did you think I was sitting in this position?" Newgate looked at Orgrim arrogantly and said with a smile on his lips. Orgrim quickly calmed down his surprised state of mind, then laughed and said, "Gee ha 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 ha, that's what you said." Yes, I seemed to be making a fuss. However, Orgrim was somewhat shocked, because before this, neither Shiki nor Kaido said that Newgate's power had not awakened. There are even people in the sea who say that it is impossible to awaken the Zhen fruit. That is not something humans can do. The power of this fruit is enough to destroy the world. If it awakens again, can it still give others a way to survive? The same is true for Orgrim's impact fruit. Over the years, he has never wanted to let the impact fruit awaken. But it seems that the more powerful the ability, the more simple and crude the ability, the more difficult it is to awaken. In short, he has been working hard for so long, but still has not found the direction. At this moment, you see Newgate, who has the power of the shock fruit, awakening his own abilities. Can you not be shocked? But despite being shocked, it felt reasonable. Yes, this old bastard is the strongest in the world. What kind of power is hidden in him? It seems that it is not unexpected. Come on, Orgrim shouted loudly. The moment he finished speaking, in the distant night sky, a warhammer burned red, carrying hot air, fell from the sky, and landed on Orgrim very spiritually. In his hands. Devil fruit weapons are so magical. After grabbing the warhammer, Orgrim didn't talk nonsense to Newgate. He exerted force with his feet, and the figure rushed towards Newgate again with a ray of red light. Then, the warhammer in his hand brought up sparks in the night sky, with a powerful impact, and hit Newgate. Newgate still refused to dodge, and slashed out with Kongyunki in his hand. The warhammer hit the transparent energy cube shrouded in front of Newgate again with unparalleled power. Then, two forces exploded. Orgrim once again felt the huge backlash from his hands. It seems that he has somewhat figured out how to use Newgate's ability after awakening. This bastard has one of the strongest attack powers in the world, and he actually turned this power into an extremely powerful weapon after awakening. Defense, borrowing the principle of counter-shock, all attacks are blocked 3 meters away from the body. Isn't this cheating? Invincible. If you have this ability, why didn't you use it in the battle atop Marine Headquarters Marineford? But soon, Orgrim discovered something, that is, the energy cube in front of Newgate dimmed slightly, and then became bright again. It seems that it is not really invincible? Is it just that the strength has not reached the critical value? But is this perverted enough? With Newgate's strength, as long as he can block it for a moment, he will be able to make various responses. The vibrating force on Kongyunki was vented, and a fierce look flashed in Orgrim's eyes. The warhammer in his hand withdrew and swung, hitting the big knife very smoothly, knocking out Newgate's power. Then, he took 2 steps back, frowning. Cool la 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 la, isn't this okay? With this kind of strength, don't even think about being on an equal footing with me. Newgate laughed loudly and said. Ha ha ha, Orgrim couldn't help but laugh, then shook his head slightly and said it's really difficult. Pay it. The moment the words fell, the impact force on Orgrim also condensed, first attached to the surface, and then seemed to penetrate into his body. That's right, Orgrim wants to forcibly increase his power. Years ago, when he used this power, he had to eat the impact. Now, it is obviously more improved. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 389. The power of the impact surged through his body, and his energy and blood began to surge rapidly. Orgrim's aura became even stronger. The warhammer in his hand burned red, and the surrounding air began to distort. The ground was dry, and getting a little closer made people feel unbearably dry. He suddenly raised his warhammer, just as Orgrim was about to attack again. Kaido's figure rushed towards Newgate. Ah ha 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 ha, old man, you are stronger again. Let me try you. Kaido laughed loudly. The mace in his hand brought out a spark of electric light, and the armed domineering energy was directly wrapped around it, and his shot was Thunder Bagua. Open. Kaido held the mace in both arms and hit Newgate with a fierce blow. Newgate still refused to dodge and laughed and said, "You are not good enough. In this dark night, you are not as good as Orgrim. What he said was extremely domineering, and he showed the strongest posture. In this world, I am afraid that he is the only one with white beard who is qualified to comment on Kaido and Orgrim. At the same time as the words fell, Nyogai-Te also slashed out with a sword. Kaido's mace hit the energy cube in front of Newgate with a strong blow. The powerful explosive force and counter-attack force emerged at the same time. Kaido's arm went numb, and his eyes were filled with tears. There was a look of surprise. When Orgrim took action just now, although he could feel that Newgate's power was extremely defensive. But after he got started, he realized that this power was far more powerful than his own. It was even more powerful than I imagined. It failed to break through Newgate's defense. On the contrary, Newgate's Kongyunkai slashed Kaido's body hard. It was not a knife wound, but a powerful impact. It blasted directly into Kaido's body. Kaido's eyes suddenly spat out, and a mouthful of old blood spurted out from his mouth. There were no injuries on the surface of his body, but he could see the force of the impact spurting out directly from his back. Then, the shock in his hand could no longer be suppressed, and Kaido was directly knocked out by Newgate's blow. He was much more embarrassed than Orgrim just now. It seemed that Newgate was right. In the dark night, Kaido is not as good as Orgrim. Orgrim raised his arm and caught it suddenly, blocking Kaido, who was rolling on the ground. Kaido got up in embarrassment and patted his body. Dusty spit out a mouthful of blood in displeasure and cursed this old guy. Why are you so strong? Kaido is the strongest and most powerful creature in a duel. Kaido has been claiming it for many years. In the early years, he often challenged Whitebeard. Relying on his immortality, he won the title again and again. They all singled out the entire Whitebeard group. Although they lost every time, it has to be said that Newgate was the one who attacked Kaido every time. This created an illusion for Kaido, that is, if they were singled out, he should be stronger than Whitebeard. In fact, most sea men have this idea. However, Orgrim has not really determined this property before, but if you compare it to the war in the future, Newgate's performance, Orgrim does think that Kaido is stronger. He doesn't know whether Newgate has become stronger at his peak in this era, or whether he should have been this strong in the first place. Maybe it is. Because of his appearance, Newgate also felt some invisible pressure, so that the abilities that were not awakened in the original story were awakened. Isn't it impossible? In short, one thing can be proven now, that is, whether it is single combat or group fighting, he, Whitebeard Edward Newgate, is the strongest. However, Orgrim already has the confidence and strength to challenge his reputation as the strongest. Let me do it, Boss Kaido, Orgrim smiled and said. Kaido felt the heat coming from around him, and he also knew that Orgrim's heart was full of fighting spirit. But at this time, Kaido was also very restless. His eyes flashed and he said, I missed this opportunity. I don't know if it will happen again in the future. 10 minutes, give me 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, if you still can't break through the old guy's awakening defense, I will just accept the defeat. When Orgrim heard this, he didn't say anything more. Although Kaido, a bastard, always regarded himself as a foolish brother and shamelessly called himself a good brother, which made Orgrim very uncomfortable. But I have to say that Kaido is sincere and sincere to him. If we really want to consider feelings, it is still a little bit. There is no need to not give him even 10 minutes of opportunity here, that would make Orgrim look like it is too small. At the same time, Orgrim, as one of the strongest people in the world, naturally understands the excitement between heroes and encountering opponents. It is natural for Kaido not to let go. If it were him, he would probably, even if you know you can't beat him, you must fight until all your bones are broken before you stop, right? Good, Orgrim laughed loudly. The moment the words fell, Kaido shouted angrily, and turned half of his body into a dragon. His strength was 3 points stronger, and with the momentum of a dragon going out to sea, he fearlessly rushed towards New York. Gates sighed. "Cool la 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 la, what a pair of talents," Newgate laughed. On the other side, the war hammer in Orgrim's hand roared again. He stamped his feet violently, and the figure rushed towards Charlotte Lingling at an extremely fast speed. Seeing Charlotte, the figure of Lingling, that dead old woman, filled Orgrim's heart with anger. All old and new hatred surged up. Although the two had never met each other, their grudges were entangled and complicated. Naturally, this move there was no room for holding back. Seeing Orgrim rushing towards her so fiercely, Charlotte Lingling felt angry in her heart. She raised the Emperor's sword in her hand and roared, "Elbaf's spear, powerful country!" The roar of the Dragon King, Orgrim's eyes lit up, and he swung the warhammer in his hand through the air. A powerful impact burst out instantly, like a dragon roaring. This powerful impact collided with the power of Waiguo, and directly it exploded into a wave of energy. Then, Orgrim's figure rushed directly into the energy wave. At the same time, Charlotte Lingling was not afraid at all. Relying on her unparalleled defense, she also held the Emperor's sword plunged into the smoke. Drink, Orgrim struck out with the crimson warhammer in his hand. Charlotte Lingling was extremely tall and condescending, and the Emperor's sword in her hand also struck out with raging flames. Boom! A loud bang. The intersection of hammers and knives, the clash of armed domination and power instantly blew away all the energy and smoke around them, revealing the figures of the two of them. The hot warhammer continued to exert force, and the surrounding air was distorted. The Emperor's sword in Charlotte Lingling's hand surged with flames, as if it wanted to burn Orgrim's body, but it was blocked by the powerful heat flow and could not break through. In terms of strength alone, Charlotte Lingling is even stronger than Kaido. She is a born monster. But even so, when fighting Orgrim, he still felt unparalleled pressure, and even the Emperor's sword began to tremble slightly. Charlotte Lingling was very shocked, because she felt like she couldn't hold it anymore. Sure enough, as soon as this idea arose in Charlotte Lingling's mind, a cruel and domineering smile appeared on the corner of Orgrim's mouth. "Gee ha 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 ha, is this the strange power you are proud of? But that's it? Even my sister is better than you." Orgrim laughed loudly. Of course, these words were more of a mockery. As soon as he finished speaking, the power of the warhammer in his hand exploded again. "Open!" Orgrim shouted loudly. This violent shout exploded, and the warhammer in his hand also carried extremely strong power, directly knocking away Charlotte Lingling's Emperor's sword. Charlotte Lingling's feet were unstable, he raised his body backwards, and the Emperor's sword in his hand was knocked open, and the door in his chest was wide open in an instant. Orgrim naturally would not miss this opportunity, but it was too late to swing the hammer, and it would feel a bit laggy when he released and retracted it. This is the flaw of heavy weapons, and it is not a problem that can be solved by force. With a slight delay, it is not impossible for Charlotte Lingling to react. Therefore, Orgrim did not have a hammer at all, but directly used it he leaned forward, then raised his elbow and slammed it into Charlotte Lingling's belly. "Elbow charge, the tiger comes down the mountain," Orgrim shouted in a low voice. I don't know if it was an illusion, but for a moment, Charlotte Lingling seemed to regard Orgrim as a real tiger descending from the mountain. The aura forced her eyes to tremble. She couldn't open her eyes. When the moment passed, she felt a sharp pain and powerful force in her abdomen. The force of the impact penetrated directly through her body, penetrating through her abdomen, and the pink on her back was a big hole exploded in her colorful dress and pajamas. Then, Charlotte Lingling gritted her teeth and tried to hold on, but she couldn't hold it in after all. A mouthful of blood spurted out like a firework. Then she couldn't hold the ground under her feet, and slightly as soon as he let go, the whole person was like a huge cannonball, and was directly knocked away by Orgrim's elbow. 2 blows were exchanged. In the first blow, Charlotte Lingling reluctantly relied on her natural power to fight with Orgrim. Orgrim stood in a stalemate for a sentence. With the second blow, she was directly knocked away by the violent hammer. On the contrary, Orgrim carried an indomitable and unrivaled momentum. Between the two, who is stronger? Weak, it's obvious at a glance. Thinking back to the scene where Kaido was blown away by Newgate's blow, many people seemed to realize a problem. Newgate must be really strong, able to steadily suppress Kaido and Og. It is not unreasonable that Rem and Charlotte Lingling have spent so many years. But now, there is almost no strength gap between Kaido and Charlotte Lingling, and neither of them can do anything to each other. But by Tien is not it can be said that Orgrim can definitely hold down half of them during the night, and is stronger than Kaido and Charlotte Lingling. He is the only one among the three who has the strength to face Whitebeard head-on, and can be evenly matched. Although the four of them are all top experts in the same echelon, Newgate and Orgrim seem to be half a step ahead again in terms of strength. No, it should be said that Newgate has always been in the lead. Half a step, and Orgrim caught up with this half step. One blow knocked Charlotte Lingling away. Orgrim put the warhammer on his shoulder and laughed boldly. Damn old woman. Is that all you have? Gee ha 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 ha, for so many years, you have never dared to enter the Evernight Sea. It is really a wise choice. Otherwise, I would have killed you, idiot. The figure was rolling. Charlotte Lingling suddenly stretched out her hand and grabbed it on the ground. Then, her fingers were like hooks, clasped on the ground, and she plowed 5 traces on the ground, and then she slid dozens of meters away again. Until then, she finally removed Orgrim's powerful power from her body. She felt a swelling pain in her abdomen, and her eyes were blood red, showing anger and anxiety. Charlotte Lingling had thoughts after Orgrim, he would be very strong, but I didn't expect that after entering the night, he would directly go to the path of perversion. He could actually hang Newgate without using the awakened power, and fly himself with one blow. Her thoughts suddenly became confused. Charlotte Lingling recalled that after becoming the top pirate for so many years, she seemed to have really relaxed. I just ate and drank all day long, and nothing seemed to happen. Now, I have finally tasted the bitter pill. I thought that I would be at most 40 or 60 with Orgrim, or even 50 or 50, but I ended up being beaten by Orgrim at 30 or 70. What the hell? If you don't die this time, you must seize the time to improve your strength in the future. Getting up from the ground, Charlotte Lingling looked very embarrassed, with blood on the corners of her mouth, and looked at Orgrim with very cruel eyes. She wanted to grab Orgrim's soul and tear it to pieces, but the problem was that only those who were afraid of her would be affected by the soul-absorbing power of her soul fruit. Is Orgrim afraid of her? Afraid of her? Obviously, not only did he not do it, but he was even prepared to beat her up. A flame burned on the Emperor's sword again. Charlotte Lingling's heart sank, and she said with a ruthless look in her eyes, "Don't be too arrogant, Orgrim. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates." Author, Zippo. Chapter 390. Gee ha 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 ha, I know how to bluff, I am just arrogant, what can you do to me? Orgrim didn't save any face for Charlotte Lingling, a dead old woman, and laughed very arrogantly. Charlotte Lingling's face was very ugly. She gritted her teeth, raised the Emperor's sword in her hand, and pointed towards Orgrim. Rem rushed over. "Well come," Orgrim laughed loudly, and danced with the warhammer in his hand, bringing up the scorching air current, and struck out with a blow from the air. There is still no suspense for the two of them to fight again. If Charlotte Lingling can explode, the seed will not be hidden at this time, it should have exploded long ago. If she cannot explode now, it means that she really cannot defeat Orgrim in the dark, and she should be hung up and beaten by Orgrim. But it's not that she doesn't have the power to fight back. Occasionally she can still bring some trouble to Orgrim. But Charlotte Lingling is a monster after all, and her physical fitness is no worse than Orgrim's. In theory, Charlotte Lingling is a monster after all. In terms of advantages, she can withstand a lot more beatings than Newgate. Perhaps Newgate's injuries are fatal, but on hers, they are just minor injuries. Therefore, despite Orgrim's beating of Sia almost throughout the whole process, Lot Lingling beat her to the point where she was losing ground and was in great embarrassment. But in fact, Charlotte Lingling could still bear it. As long as it's done, as long as it's done, Charlotte Lingling thought angrily in her heart. As long as the sun rises, she will give Orgrim a good look. But the problem is that it is still early before dawn. It is not just Orgrim who is violent. Hammer Charlotte Lingling. On Newgate's side, he almost used a crushing posture to hammer Kaido. Newgate has no real shortcomings. If I have to be more serious, it is his body. His quality is far inferior to that of Kaido, Orgrim, and Charlotte Lingling. But now, he awakens his energy and opens a defensive shield directly in front of him. If you can't break it, then sit down, Wax. The biggest gap between him and Orgrim and others was immediately filled. Kaido's attacks really couldn't penetrate Newgate's defense. Then he would have to suffer all this time. Beat him up. Therefore, although his strength is only half a step away, Newgate was forced to exert a crushing momentum. At the same time, in a ruins not too far away from here, not too close, Big News Morgans was hiding inside with a disgraced face, with several broken stone slabs pressing on his body. However, he had no intention of struggling to move. On the contrary, he seemed not to care at all that the ruins were pressing on him. It was true that he was injured, but it's not very heavy. The camera in his arms is also well protected. He is hidden here so that no one can see him. On the contrary, he can see everything over there clearly, which is not very good. But in fact, no one cares about him. Be it Orgrim or Newgate, they have already noticed this guy. But no one wants to pay attention to him. If he likes to take pictures, just ask him to take pictures. Orgrim and Newgate are both very confident people. Wow, this time it will really shock the whole world. Is that Orgrim really so strong? He is indeed the king of the night that I like. In the dark night, he is simply invincible. What should be the title of the news? Butter Island Battle? No, 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 this is too casual and has no momentum at all. King of night, ah, by the way, isn't there a saying? In this world, the night belongs to Orgrim. In this news, Morgans, will rectify the sentence. That's right, in this world, the night belongs to Orgrim, and the king of the night, Morgans, lay in the ruins and said to himself excitedly. I have to say that he really worked hard to do the news he did. He is a person with feelings and integrity, and a good bird. As Newgate and Orgrim's stance became more and more open, Kaido and Charlotte Lingling were unable to confront each other head-on, so they changed their fighting methods and were no longer limited to fighting in one place. Therefore, the fighting area between the four of them is getting bigger and bigger, spreading outward from the center of Butter Island, forcing many of their cotters to stop and withdraw from the battlefield, otherwise they will be accidentally killed. Eating dragon breath or something, that's not a joke. The hammer suddenly hit Charlotte Lingling's Emperor's sword. I saw that this damn old woman had learned a lesson this time and let go of the Emperor's sword. The power in Orgrim's hand suddenly disappeared and the warhammer was in a stalemate. It slipped out in an instant. At the same time, Charlotte Lingling also seized the opportunity. She brought out a bolt of lightning and flames with her other hand, and roared soul crit. Orgrim was not panicking. He also loosened his hand and let go of the warhammer. He came out and hit the ground a few meters away. As a result, he got rid of the power of slippery inertia. He twisted his waist, raised his arm, and punched Charlotte Lingling's soul. Go out. The two fists met. Charlotte Lingling's ability was flashy, but Orgrim's ability was simple and crude. Although it was a condescending blow, Charlotte Lingling was unable to take advantage at all, and was staggered by Orgrim's punch. A flash of light flashed in Orgrim's eyes, and he exerted force with his feet. He pounced directly towards Charlotte Lingling, then jumped into the air and grabbed her arms directly on Charlotte Lingling's shoulders. "The tiger climbs the mountain hard," Orgrim shouted violently. He grabbed Charlotte Lingling's shoulders with both hands and exerted force. He lifted his body up again, and with arm domineering and impact force on his knees, he directly hit Xia Lingling on Lot Lingling's chin. Charlotte Lingling didn't react at all. Her chin was directly grabbed by Orgrim and he hit with a knee. At the same time, the move of the tiger climbing up the mountain is just like the tiger climbing up the mountain. Both hands must also be used. The first time Orgrim used force was when he grabbed Charlotte Lingling's shoulders. When he lifted his body, he was already on Charlotte Lingling's face. The moment the knee came out, his hands exerted force again, and directly pressed on Charlotte Lingling's head, with a climbing posture, naturally to press down the thing in his hand. Only then it was a set of moves. Up and down, the powerful force exploded directly on Charlotte Lingling's head. Instantly, nosebleeds broke out, and then Charlotte Lingling felt her eyes blacken, and she almost lost consciousness. In just such a moment, she woke up again, but her head was groggy, her steps were sloppy, and she staggered back 2 steps. But Orgrim didn't stop at all, pressing one hand on Charlotte Lingling's head. Up, he twisted his waist in the air, flipped 180 degrees laterally, raised his leg and swept out like a long whip. A rollover kick hit Charlotte Lingling's left ear directly. Charlotte Lingling really couldn't hold back her scream this time, and then grabbed the ground with her head. She was kicked to the ground by Orgrim and slid out while wiping the ground. At this time, many people who had been observing the fighting here were stunned. If before, Orgrim had always shown a sense of power and violence, and what he had shown was his indomitable bravery and ferocity. So just now, he showed the beauty of skills, no longer simply rough, but with a sense of skill that is unique to him. Sharp, fierce, combined together. This is actually something Orgrim learned after his battle with Sci-fi in Impelton. That guy Sci-fi, judging from the current situation, although his strength is also very strong, he can no longer keep up with Orgrim's rhythm. Orgrim was able to defeat Zephyr in the dark. Now, during the day, it would probably be enough. Although they are all masters ranked in the first echelon of strength, the gap between them is still huge. However, although Sci-fi's strength is stuck at that position due to physical illness, it is embarrassing. But I have to say that his fighting skills are very powerful. At first Orgrim was simple and crude, but he used his skills to teach him how to behave. It also made Orgrim realize the necessity of this technique. There is no need to learn to show off skills or anything, that is just the thinking of a fool. But this kind of thing, when used at a critical moment, can exert its own power at 120%, and it may be able to hit hard with one blow. This is the necessity of skills in this world. Before, no matter how many times Orgrim knocked Charlotte Lingling away, the dead old woman could always get up quickly. But this time, Charlotte Lingling seemed to be beaten stupidly. She struggled on the ground and tried to get up, but she seemed to have lost her balance and fell to the ground again twice. Orgrim grinned with a ferocious smile. He knew that Charlotte Lingling's head must be dizzy now. Whether it is a monster or a normal person, the head is always a vital part. Not planning to hold anything back, Orgrim stepped on her and was ready to go up and kill Charlotte Lingling. But at this moment, Kaido's huge figure flew over. Orgrim glanced at this guy helplessly, then stretched out his hand to catch the huge power coming from him, and held him firmly. At this time, Kaido, with a bruised nose and swollen face, looked extremely embarrassed. As soon as he stood firm, he spat out a mouthful of blood and shouted angrily, "This won't work, this fight won't work. We have to find another way. I don't believe in Newgates. Can the old guy maintain this state forever? Why are Orgrim and Newgate said to be half a step ahead, instead of entering a new level? Because the extreme power they can maintain is time-limited and not a regular state. Unless they can normalize this extremely powerful power, they can truly surpass the likes of Kaido and Charlotte Lingling. Powerful class. Otherwise, there is still the possibility of being defeated. Orgrim didn't need to say anything more. When the day came, the power of night in his body would naturally dissipate. The power of Newgate's awakening is the physical factor. Almost except for the animal type, the awakened power will inevitably greatly consume the physical strength and endurance of the ability user. This flaw is also a key factor for non-awakened ability users to win. Otherwise, if you can really defeat all the invincible opponents in the world by awakening, then everyone doesn't have to fight each other. When they meet, they can show each other how much they have developed their abilities. Whoever is higher will be more powerful, right? But isn't that nonsense? Therefore, although the awakening of ability is powerful, it is also a double-edged sword. If you use it well, you will kill the enemy; if you use it poorly, you will hurt yourself. For more than 10 minutes, Kaido had a head-on confrontation with Newgate. Although in the next 3 or 2 minutes, he also chose tactics to avoid his sharp edges and expanded the combat area, it was still difficult for him to defeat Newgate. Offensive. But this does not mean that Kaido has no chance of winning at all. He can rely on his physical fitness to keep fighting Newgate. It was so exhausted that Newgate was exhausted and could no longer support the awakening power. At that time, the situation will change. Of course, this also depends on Newgate's fighting wisdom. He is not a fool. If Kaido wants to consume him, he will consume him. Isn't that an idiot? However, Orgrim did not give Kaido such a chance. He grabbed Kaido and said, 10 minutes, boss Kaido. Kaido was stunned for a moment, and then said angrily, damn it. Okay. I am resigned to losing this time, and I must find a chance to challenge that old bastard in a duel someday. Let's see who is stronger. As soon as he finished speaking, Kaido turned to look at Charlotte Lingling. Just like Orgrim didn't observe the battle between Kaido and Newgate, Kaido didn't observe this side either. After all, Orgrim was okay. He, Kaido, had already gone all out when dealing with Newgate just now, so how could he have the energy to care about this mess? As a result, I was shocked when I saw it. Damn it, in 10 minutes, you beat Charlotte Lingling to the ground. Is it so powerful? But at this moment, Charlotte Lingling seemed to have regained her composure. She stood up suddenly on the ground and stared at Orgrim with blood-red eyes. She seemed to be resentful. But Orgrim has lost interest in her at this time. Using his strongest state to torture food is simply a waste. Only Newgate is worthy of a fight? Gee ha 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 ha, okay, then leave it to me this time. Orgrim laughed loudly and responded to Kaido. Then he looked at Newgate with excited eyes. Newgate also grinned and rushed towards Orgrim from a distance. Mew waved, as if he had been waiting for you for a long time.